Love's a grave matter. A spellbinding paranormal rom-com full of mischief, magic, and unexpected love. By Wynne Valentine. Copyright 2024 by Wynne Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any form by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, scanning, or otherwise without written permission from the publisher. It is illegal to copy this book, post it to a website, or distribute it by any other means without permission. This novel is entirely a work of fiction. The names, characters, and incidents portrayed in it are the work of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or localities, is entirely coincidental. Wynne Valentine asserts the moral right to be identified as the author of this work. Designations used by companies to distinguish their products are often claimed as trademarks. All brand names and product names used in this book and on its cover are trade names, service marks, trademarks, and registered trademarks of their respective owners. The publishers and the book are not associated with any product or vendor mentioned in this book. None of the companies referenced within the book have endorsed the book. Book cover by Dana Sacco. Chapter 1: The Potion Predicament. Juliet Moon hummed Love Potion Number 9 while rummaging through her shop's cluttered shelves, her purple hair bouncing with each enthusiastic movement. The familiar scent of herbs, crystals, and just a hint of magical mishap filled her nostrils as she gathered ingredients for her latest creation. Let's see, dried rose petals from Venus's personal garden, check? Moonstone dust harvested under a waxing crescent, absolutely. She grabbed a sparkly bottle that seemed to shimmer with attitude, its crystal facets catching the afternoon light streaming through her shop's stained glass windows. And one teensy drop of unicorn tears. Come on, you gorgeous thing, just open up for mama. The bottle remained stubbornly sealed, its silver stopper gleaming with what Juliet swore was smug defiance. Your crystalline structure is simply dazzling today, Juliet cooed, stroking the bottle's neck with the reverence usually reserved for priceless artifacts. And that rainbow refraction? Don't even get me started on how the light catches your edges, the way you sparkle puts diamonds to shame. Oh my God, just hex it open already, Zara groaned, floating through a shelf of dried herbs, disturbing several bundles of sage that swayed in her ghostly wake. The ghost's vintage polka dot dress swayed in a non-existent breeze as she rolled her ethereal eyes, her pearl necklace catching the shop's magical ambient light. You can't rush a relationship with unicorn tears, Juliet protested, adjusting her oversized glasses as they slipped down her nose. They're very sensitive. She batted her eyelashes at the bottle, channeling her best puppy dog expression. And so exceptionally rare and precious. The bottle finally popped open with a satisfied little sigh, releasing a shimmer of rainbow-tinged mist. Success. Juliet danced over to her cauldron, which was already bubbling with an iridescent base potion, her purple hair bouncing with each triumphant step. She began adding ingredients with what she liked to call intuitive flair, though her coven typically referred to it as chaos incarnate, usually while ducking for cover. The grimoire specifically says 3 rose petals, Zara pointed out, peering over Juliet's shoulder, her transparent form casting prismatic shadows in the potion's steam. That was at least 7. But they're so pretty. And love needs beauty, right? Juliet sprinkled in the moonstone dust, watching it create tiny constellations in the mixture that seemed to dance and swirl of their own accord. Besides, when has following the exact recipe ever led to true innovation? When has not following it ever led to anything but disaster? Zara's ghostly form flickered with exasperation. Juliet ignored her spectral friend's pessimism as divine inspiration struck, her green eyes lighting up with that dangerous spark that usually preceded magical mayhem. Ooh, you know what this needs? A pinch of pixie dust for extra sparkle? Don't you dare, Zara started, making a futile grab at Juliet's sleeve with her incorporeal hands. But Juliet had already tossed in a generous handful of the glittering substance, her freckled face glowing with anticipation. The potion, which should have been a delicate rose gold, suddenly turned the kind of hot pink that would make a flamingo blush and began to emit a suspicious whistling sound. That's different. Juliet tilted her head, adjusting her glasses. But different is good. It's just expressing itself uniquely, like a rebellious teenager finding their path. The cauldron apparently disagreed with this assessment. It began to shake, rattling against the ancient stone floor. Then, to everyone's surprise, it started humming. Not metaphorically, actual musical notes emerged from the bubbling mixture, something that sounded suspiciously like "Can't Help Falling in Love." Is it supposed to do that? Zara asked dryly. Well, no, but Juliet lunged for the cauldron as it did a little dance, knocking into her prized display of crystal vials. The delicate containers toppled like expensive dominoes. No. The resulting crash was almost musical, but definitely not in a good way. Before Juliet could cast a containment spell, the cauldron let out an almighty belch. A massive cloud of pink smoke exploded upward, filling the shop with thousands of tiny sparkles that smelled like a cotton candy machine had a tragic love affair with a broken heart. This is fine, Juliet coughed, waving glitter away from her face. Totally salvageable. Juliet? Zara pointed toward the windows, where the shimmering smoke was seeping through every crack and crevice, rolling down Evergloam's main street like a romantic fog machine gone rogue. The shop's enchanted broom, sensing disaster, sprang into action. It swept manically at the glitter coating every surface, but only succeeded in creating mini pink tornadoes that made the whole situation exponentially worse. Juliet's phone buzzed, then buzzed again. And again. She pulled it from her pocket to find her messaging app exploding with texts from her Coven members. Help! Just spilled an entire latte on my date's white shirt. Why did I just tell my crush his nose hair was cute? OMG, why am I suddenly attracted to my neighbor's garden gnome? Well, congratulations, Zara drawled, floating upside down with her arms crossed. You've just cursed the entire Coven's love lives. That's got to be some kind of record. No, there has to be a counter-curse. Juliet scrambled for her grandmother's grimoire, but the ancient book snapped shut the moment her fingers touched its spine. She tried again, only to have it scoot away across the counter like a shy teenager avoiding a slow dance. On her third attempt, the book actually hissed at her, a sound remarkably similar to her mother's disapproving sighs. Great, Juliet groaned, slumping against the counter. Pink glitter rained from her hair like romantic dandruff, coating her shoulders and the floor in what looked like a unicorn's crime scene. Even the books are cursed. She absently tried to brush some of the sparkles off her favorite sweater, but they only seemed to multiply and spread, clinging to her with the determination of magical static. The bell above the shop door chimed cheerfully, and a middle-aged woman wearing too many crystal necklaces poked her head in. The crystals clinked together like wind chimes in a hurricane, and Juliet could practically feel the rose quartz judging her. Oh good, you're open. I need your strongest love potion. My cat's been looking a bit lonely lately and... Zara's laughter echoed through the shop like a haunted wind chime, having a hysteric fit. The sound bounced off the walls, and made several potion bottles wobble precariously on their shelves. Juliet just buried her face in her glitter-covered hands, wondering if it was too late to consider a career in non-magical accounting. At least spreadsheets couldn't curse you, unless you counted Excel's tendency to eat important formulas at the worst possible moment. Sebastian stood at the grand window of his study, watching the sunset paint dramatic shadows across Gloamstone Manor's overgrown gardens. The cream-colored envelope from the council felt unusually heavy in his hands, its official SCREAM wax seal mocking him with its pristine perfection. Ridiculous, he muttered, letting the letter flutter to his antique mahogany desk. The wood's rich patina, accumulated over centuries of Lightfeather correspondence, seemed to mock the paper's pristine newness. He pinched the bridge of his nose, the words swimming before his eyes for the 100th time that evening. The council's criticism couldn't have been more transparent if they'd written it in blood. Lack of approachability and insufficient community engagement might as well have been stakes through his carefully constructed political aspirations. His reflection caught his eye in the enchanted mirror hanging between two towering bookcases, its gilt frame catching the last rays of sunlight. Sebastian adjusted his already impeccable charcoal suit, smoothing down an invisible wrinkle. Centuries of noble vampire lineage, and we're stuck with Lightfeather, he grumbled, glaring at his reflection. Couldn't great-great-grandfather have chosen something more intimidating during the Great Surname Declaration? Bloodfang was available. Even Nightshade had possibilities. The mirror shimmered slightly, as if sharing his displeasure. The wooden floors creaked beneath his Italian leather shoes as he paced the study, passing countless portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Their painted eyes seemed to follow his movement, each generation of Lightfeathers judging his current predicament with identical looks of aristocratic disappointment. The candlelight flickered as he passed, casting dancing shadows across their disdainful expressions. A slight disturbance in the air announced the arrival of the evening paper, materializing on his desk with an elegant whoosh. "Thank you, Graves," Sebastian acknowledged his ghostly butler's delivery without looking up. The temperature dropped a few degrees in response, Graves's typical way of saying, "You're welcome." The front page stopped him cold. There was Luce Thornshade, her silvery hair gleaming as she cut a ribbon at yet another supernatural charity gala. The headline practically sparkled, "Thornshade dazzles at Moonlight Children's Hospital fundraiser." In a rare display of emotion, Sebastian crumpled the newspaper with a satisfying crunch. As the paper collapsed in his grip, a smaller article caught his eye. "Mysterious glittery fog descends over Evergloam, local witch claims, just a minor magical mishap." The faint scent of lavender and chaos magic wafted from the ink. His phone buzzed against the desk, the screen lighting up with a rapid succession of messages from his campaign manager, each notification piercing the study's carefully cultivated atmosphere of brooding contemplation. "Have you considered a TikTok account? Werewolf Shelter volunteer opportunity this weekend? Please try smiling at the next supernatural town hall." Sebastian's jaw clenched, one fang catching his lower lip. He pulled the ancient Lightfeather family ledger from its place of honor on the shelf, its pages crackling as he opened it. The leather binding released a familiar musty scent, tinged with centuries of magical residue. Each entry told the same story, the gradual decline of their influence over the past century. Where once the Lightfeathers had commanded respect throughout the supernatural world, now they were barely maintaining their position in Evergloam's social hierarchy. The most recent pages were painfully sparse, a testament to their waning significance. A soft thud against the window announced the arrival of a bat messenger, its tiny wings casting flickering shadows across Sebastian's antique desk. He opened the window with practiced grace, accepting the rolled parchment from the creature's tiny claws, while absently offering it a dried berry from the dish he kept specifically for such deliveries. The latest council polling numbers confirmed his worst fears. He was trailing Thornshade in every category that mattered to the modern supernatural voter. Relatability, 23% down 5% from last month, and romantic appeal, 17% no change, stood out in particularly damning red ink, the numbers seeming to pulse mockingly in the candlelight. His fangs extended slightly as he reached the bottom of the report, where a personal note had been added in flowing script, the ink shimmering with that particular iridescence that marked official council correspondence. "The council suggests considering a romantic partnership to soften your image. Perhaps someone with connections to the local community?" Catching his reflection in the now darkened window, Sebastian attempted what his campaign manager called an approachable smile. The result looked more like he'd bitten into something particularly unpleasant, his fangs catching the moonlight in a way that made him appear more predatory than personable. "Bloody hell," he cursed under his breath, letting the expression drop and running a hand through his immaculately styled hair. With a resigned sigh, he settled into his leather chair, its ancient springs creaking in protest as he pulled out a sheet of his personal stationery. The header embossed with the Lightfeather crest, a rather delicate feather wrapped in vines, another ancestral choice he questioned, seemed to mock him as he began drafting a list of potential strategic alliances, each stroke of his fountain pen more forceful than necessary. Above his head, the portrait of his great-grandfather, the very vampire who had chosen their unfortunate surname, in what Sebastian could only assume was a moment of temporary insanity, appeared to shake his head disapprovingly in the flickering candlelight. Sebastian could have sworn he heard the painted figure mutter something about modern politics, and in my day we simply threatened to drain their blood, though he chose to ignore the portrait's commentary, as he usually did. The list grew longer, each name more unsuitable than the last, ranging from prominent supernatural families to up-and-coming magical entrepreneurs. Sebastian crossed out Vampire Dating Registry with particular vigor, leaving a hole in the expensive paper. He'd rather face the sunrise than subject himself to that particular modern indignity, especially after hearing horror stories about profile pictures taken with enchanted selfie crystals. The grandfather clock in the corner struck 9, its chimes echoing through the manor's empty halls like a funeral dirge. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie ever so slightly, a private admission of frustration he'd never allow in public. The council seat was slipping through his fingers, and with it, any hope of restoring the Lightfeather name to its former glory. Centuries of careful political maneuvering were crumbling before modern popularity contests. Outside, the glittery residue from the mysterious fog caught the moonlight, making the garden look like it had been dusted with diamonds. Sebastian made a mental note to have someone look into that particular magical mishap, after he solved his more pressing political crisis. He suspected Thornshade's involvement. Such theatrical displays were exactly her style, though proving it would be another matter entirely. For now, he returned to his list, adding local community leaders at the bottom with 3 precise question marks. The portrait of his great-grandfather seemed to sigh dramatically, and Sebastian couldn't help but agree with the sentiment. This was, without doubt, the lowest point in Lightfeather history, and that included the great vampire bake sale disaster of 1922. Chapter 2: A Proposition Gone Awry. Juliet slumped into the black leather booth at Darkfang Diner, trailing a cloud of stubborn glitter that refused to fade. Every sparkle felt like a tiny, taunting reminder of her magical mishap. The ghostly waitress, Martha according to her name tag that flickered in and out of existence, floated by with a sympathetic smile, and handed over a menu that immediately shifted from its usual gothic black to a melancholy blue. "That bad, huh?" Martha's ethereal voice echoed with concern, her translucent form shimmering like heat waves over asphalt. "You have no idea," Juliet mumbled, watching as another sprinkle of glitter drifted onto the table's surface, catching the light from the bat-shaped sconces above. "I'll just have one bloody good milkshake, extra strawberry syrup," Nash's warm voice interrupted as he slid into the booth across from her. His amber eyes crinkled with worry, and his flannel shirt looked like he'd been wrestling with the wolf cubs again at the sanctuary, complete with tiny paw prints and tufts of fur clinging to the fabric. He pushed the already ordered milkshake toward her, its red syrup artfully dripping down the sides like something from a horror movie's dessert menu, topped with a generous dollop of whipped cream and a plastic bat garnish. "Nash, you didn't have to. Please? Your magical mishaps usually end up on the local news. This time, you're literally sparkling with distress." He flashed that easy smile that always made her feel a little better, even when everything was going spectacularly wrong. The kind of smile that made her wonder why they'd never, but no, she couldn't go there. Not now. At the counter, a sharp-suited figure hunched over his coffee cup, though his pointed ears twitched noticeably in their direction. Juliet recognized Donovan Lupescu, that irritating reporter from the Supernatural Gazette, his yellow notepad already poised for action. His coffee cup had telltale bacon-flavored creamer wafting from it. Great. Just what she needed, press coverage of her latest disaster. "It's not just a mishap this time," Juliet groaned, gesturing wildly, her purple hair momentarily flashing a distressed shade of green. "I was trying to brew this true love elixir, right? Something to boost sales at the shop, maybe help some lonely hearts find their perfect match." Her hand caught the salt shaker mid-gesture, sending it spinning toward the edge of the table like a miniature tornado. Nash's hand shot out, catching it smoothly, and for a moment their fingers brushed, sending an unexpected tingle up her arm. Juliet felt her cheeks warm as she quickly withdrew her hand, focusing intently on her milkshake, watching the whipped cream slowly melt into the strawberry mixture. Instead, she continued, I managed to curse my entire coven's love lives. The potion just went poof. She mimicked an explosion with her hands, sending another shower of glitter cascading. And this pink smoke went everywhere, and now there's glitter, and my hair won't stop changing colors when I'm stressed, and... The ancient jukebox in the corner crackled to life, its neon trim flickering ominously as the opening chords of Bad Moon Rising filled the diner. Nash grimaced, and Juliet couldn't help but let out a watery laugh at the cosmic timing of it all, her glasses slightly fogging up from the heat of her embarrassment. Universe has a sense of humor, at least, she muttered, just as Donovan casually relocated to a booth closer to them, hiding his sharp features behind a menu while his pen scratched frantically across his notepad, the sound unnaturally loud to her anxious ears. Nash took a massive bite of his full moon special, a burger that seemed to grow larger the closer it got to the full moon, today nearly the size of a dinner plate, and chewed thoughtfully. You know, he said, swallowing, dabbing at a spot of supernatural sauce on his chin, maybe this isn't as bad as you think. Could even be an opportunity. An opportunity to be kicked out of my coven? Because that's definitely on the table right now. The council's already breathing down my neck about this whole mess. No, hear me out. What if you could show everyone you're not affected by the curse? That you've got everything under control? You could turn this whole situation around. Juliet's hair shifted to a deeper shade of purple as anxiety crept in, the ends starting to curl and frizz like they always did when she was stressed. She stirred her milkshake so vigorously that a tiny magical whirlpool started forming in the glass, complete with miniature lightning strikes around the edges. And how exactly would I do that? Because my track record with fixing magical mishaps isn't exactly stellar. A sudden clatter drew their attention as Donovan fumbled and dropped his bag of bacon-flavored crisps, creating enough noise to mask his attempt to slide even closer to their conversation. His notepad was already covered in messy scribbles, and she could have sworn she saw her name circled multiple times. Martha, the ghostly waitress, drifted over, giving him a stern look that literally chilled the air around his booth, frost patterns spreading across his water glass. Nash leaned in, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. A high-profile relationship. Something to show everyone that love is still possible, curse or no curse. Think about it, Sebastian Lightfeather is running for council re-election, right? He's perfect for this. Sebastian Light, are you crazy? Juliet spluttered, absently drawing tiny hearts in her spilled milkshake with her straw. Each one popped with a sad little poof, sending more glitter into the air. A few sparks of magic caused the nearest salt shaker to do a little dance. He's the most uptight vampire in Evergloam. He probably color codes his blood bags. And alphabetizes his cape collection. Exactly why it would work. He needs to seem more approachable. You need to prove the curse isn't real, it's perfect. You'd be helping each other out. Martha made another attempt to shoo Donovan away, her spectral form growing slightly more intimidating, but he just ordered more coffee, his yellow eyes practically glowing with interest as he pretended to study the menu he was holding upside down. She could see him mouthing words as he wrote, probably already crafting some sensational headline. Or, Nash continued, ticking off options on his fingers, leaving slight claw marks on the table's surface in his enthusiasm. There's that phoenix who runs the magical recycling center. Or maybe that siren who teaches underwater basket weaving at the community center. The one who makes all his students wear nose plugs so they can't hear him sing? Pass. Juliet reached for her wallet, pulling out a handful of enchanted coins that immediately began humming a cheerful tune about proper tipping etiquette. One particularly enthusiastic coin started tap dancing across the table. As she stood to leave, she caught Donovan's reflection in the chrome napkin holder, his sharp features twisted into a predatory grin as his pen flew across the notepad. The sight made her stomach twist uncomfortably. Whatever she decided to do, she'd have to do it fast, before the local supernatural press turned her magical mishap into tomorrow's headline. Knowing Donovan, He probably already had 3 different versions drafted, each more sensational than the last. Nash fell into step beside her, and she tried not to notice how he automatically adjusted his stride to match hers, or how his presence made her feel just a little bit steadier. Even if her love life was cursed, at least she had one friend she could count on. Behind them, Donovan's voice carried clearly. "Martha, darling, tell me everything you know about our little witch's potion problem." Sebastian swept into the Velvet Vein nightclub, his dark cloak billowing behind him with a dramatic flair that would have been embarrassing if he hadn't spent centuries perfecting it. The crystal skull chandeliers cast shifting shadows across the supernatural crowd, their ethereal light catching on fangs, fairy wings, and the occasional floating specter. His jaw tightened at the sight of Luce Thornshade holding court in the VIP section. Her silvery hair caught the light like spun moonbeams as she gestured elegantly, clearly entertaining the cluster of council members hanging on her every word. The sound of their laughter grated against his enhanced hearing, each tinkling note a reminder of the political ground he'd lost in recent weeks. He watched as she produced a small orb of phi light, drawing appreciative gasps from her audience. "The usual, Mr. Lightfeather?" The bartender's voice pulled his attention away from his rival. Sebastian suppressed a wince at his surname, wondering for the 1000th time what his ancestors had been thinking. AB negative. The Hemlock Valley vintage, if you have it. He straightened his already impeccable cuffs, a habit developed over centuries of maintaining appearances. As he waited for his drink, fragments of conversation filtered through the club's ambient noise, his vampire hearing picking up dozens of overlapping discussions. The DJ booth, sensing his mood, shifted to a darker melody that matched his brooding thoughts perfectly, the bass thrumming through the ancient floorboards beneath his feet. "Did you hear about the glitter curse? Entire Coven. Purple-haired witch at the Moonbeam Apothecary." Sebastian's interest peaked. He'd heard whispers about a magical mishap, but hadn't paid much attention to small-town gossip. Until now. His gaze swept the dance floor, cataloging faces with practiced efficiency, before landing on a witch whose purple hair seemed to crackle with barely contained magical energy. She stood near the edge of the crowd, nervously fiddling with an assortment of mismatched charms while speaking animatedly to a semi-transparent ghost. Something about her chaotic energy called to him, suggesting both opportunity and danger, a combination he'd learned to pay attention to over his long existence. "Completely ruined everyone's love lives," the witch was saying, her voice carrying to his sensitive ears. "I mean, who accidentally curses their entire coven? Me, apparently. Just add it to the list of Juliet Moon's greatest magical disasters." Sebastian took a calculated sip of his drink, mind already working through the possibilities as he observed the scene before him. A witch with a tendency for magical chaos and a desperate need for redemption could be exactly what he needed to appear more relatable to the voting public. After centuries of careful image cultivation, perhaps a dash of unpredictability was precisely what his campaign required. He moved closer to the dance floor, pretending to check his phone while positioning himself within better eavesdropping range. The spell-infused floor pulsed beneath his feet, sending waves of magical energy through his expensive leather shoes. The sensation reminded him uncomfortably of the time he'd accidentally stepped into a fairy ring at one of Luce Thornshade's garden parties, an embarrassment he'd rather forget. He was so focused on appearing casual while listening to Juliet's conversation that he almost didn't notice her backing up toward him, arms waving as she apparently demonstrated the explosion of her failed potion. Almost. His vampire reflexes could have easily avoided the collision, but something, perhaps centuries of political instinct, made him stay put. Her Technicolor cocktail splashed across his immaculate black suit, creating a rainbow stain that would have made a lesser vampire cringe. The drink smelled sickeningly sweet, like cotton candy and unicorn tears, and he could already feel it seeping through to his silk shirt. "Oh my gods, oh my gods." Juliet spun around, her green eyes widening comically behind her round glasses. Her purple hair crackled with nervous energy, sending tiny sparks into the air around them. "I'm so sorry." Here, let me just. She pulled out her wand, muttering a cleaning spell that made the stains spread into an even more impressive pattern, now resembling something between a tie-dye disaster and a modern art masterpiece. Sebastian raised one perfectly arched eyebrow, watching as she grew increasingly flustered. The corner of his mouth twitched, suppressing what might have been amusement. I see your reputation for magical creativity isn't exaggerated. My reputation? Her cheeks flushed pink. Oh no, you've heard about the curse. Of course you've heard about the curse. Everyone's heard about the curse. I'm going to go die of embarrassment now. Can you die of embarrassment? Because I think I'm about to find out. A movement in his peripheral vision caught Sebastian's attention. Donovan Lupescu, that irritating werewolf journalist, skulking near a potted plant with his ever-present notepad. Sebastian placed a gentle but firm hand on Juliet's elbow, steering her toward a quieter corner of the club. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, he murmured, noting how the DJ booth immediately switched to something slow and romantic. He was going to have words with whoever enchanted that thing. Oh? Yes, that would be, Juliet's rambling cut off as she noticed Donovan. She lowered her voice to a whisper that probably carried to half the supernatural creatures in the club. Is that Donovan Lupescu? He's been following me around all day. I think he wants to write about the curse. My, Sebastian, a silky voice interrupted. I didn't realize your campaign strategy involved wearing cocktails. Loose Thornshade glided into view, her violet eyes gleaming with barely concealed amusement. Though I must say, consorting with small-town witches is an interesting choice for someone of your lineage. Sebastian felt Juliet stiffen beside him, but before she could respond, he reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card, offering it to her with a slight bow that he knew would irritate Luce. Perhaps we should discuss our mutual interests over coffee, Miss Moon. He held her gaze meaningfully. I believe we might be able to help each other with our respective situations. Above them, the crystal skull chandeliers flickered in what Sebastian could have sworn was approval, their magical light casting interesting shadows across the rainbow stain on his suit. Somehow, he couldn't bring himself to mind. Straightening his jacket, a futile gesture given its current technicolor state, Sebastian allowed himself a small, measured smile. I'll stop by your apothecary first thing tomorrow morning. That is, assuming none of your enchanted cleaning supplies try to assault me again. The corner of his mouth twitched as he recalled the overzealous broom that had nearly swept him off his feet during his last visit. Shall we say 9 o'clock? I find punctuality pairs well with plotting. The chandeliers dimmed momentarily, as if chuckling at his attempt at humor. For a vampire who had spent centuries cultivating an air of dignified mystery, Sebastian was beginning to suspect he was losing his touch. Or perhaps it was just the rainbow stain talking. Chapter 3: Terms and Conditions. Juliet darted around the moonbeam apothecary like a hummingbird on espresso, frantically directing her enchanted broom to sweep away the stubborn glitter that still lingered from yesterday's catastrophe. The temperamental cauldron in the corner huffed out another plume of lavender smoke, clearly still sulking. This is fine. Everything's fine, she muttered, adjusting the crooked clearance, slightly cursed item sign for the 5th time, wincing as the corner caught on her sweater's dancing cat pattern. Just a totally normal business meeting with a completely terrifying vampire about a totally crazy fake dating scheme. No big deal. Completely and utterly normal for a Tuesday afternoon. You're talking to yourself again, Zara pointed out, materializing through the herb-drying rack, sending dried lavender swaying. And your hair's doing that thing where it looks like you stuck your finger in a magical socket. You know, like that time you tried to enchant the toaster? Juliet's hands flew to her purple locks, feeling the static electricity crackling beneath her fingers. Her heart did a nervous little jig in her chest. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He'll be here any. The shop bell chimed precisely at 4 o'clock, and Sebastian Lightfeather ducked through the doorway, his pristine black suit a stark contrast to the colorful chaos of her shop. He moved with careful precision, eyeing the dangling bundles of herbs like they might attack him. Which, to be fair, the sneezewort sometimes did, especially during allergy season. "Miss Moon," he said, straightening his already straight tie, the silver silk catching the afternoon light. "I trust I haven't kept you waiting." "No. Not at all. I was just—" The enchanted broom chose that moment to zip past, deliberately sweeping a pile of dust directly toward Sebastian's polished shoes. He took a swift step backward, his expression shifting from neutral to barely concealed horror, as a cloud of glitter-infused dust threatened his immaculate appearance. "I am so sorry." Juliet grabbed the broom, wrestling with it as it tried to make another pass. Her glasses slipped down her nose in the struggle. "Bad broom? We talked about this. No assaulting potential business partners." She shoved it into the nearest closet, where it thumped against the door in protest, creating a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like a tantrum. "Charming," Sebastian said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a color-coded spreadsheet, each page meticulously tabbed with little golden markers. "Perhaps we should discuss the mutually beneficial arrangement I mentioned at the Velvet Vein." Zara drifted through the wall, hovering near Sebastian's shoulder to peek at his documents. "Ooh, someone's thorough. Look at all those pie charts. And is that a relationship timeline with bullet points?" She waggled her ethereal eyebrows suggestively. Juliet tried to focus on Sebastian's presentation, but her attention kept wandering to the way Zara was making faces behind him, miming vampire fangs with her fingers and pretending to swoon dramatically. The ghost's antics were making it impossible to concentrate on Sebastian's careful explanation of optimal hand-holding intervals and scheduled spontaneous encounters. "As you can see," Sebastian continued, "a strategic partnership would provide significant advantages for both parties. My connections to the council combined with your unique situation could, but it would never work." Juliet threw up her hands, accidentally knocking into a shelf of emotion-sensing crystals. They tumbled down, rolling across the floor and all turning a stubborn shade of skeptical orange. "We're complete opposites. You're all vampire-y and brooding, and well, I accidentally enchanted my toaster last week, and now it only makes toast with motivational messages burned into it." Sebastian pinched the bridge of his nose. "I fail to see how your appliance's emotional support capabilities are relevant to." "That's exactly my point." A row of potion bottles on the counter began humming in harmony with her rising anxiety. Juliet quickly waved her wand to silence them, but a shower of sparkles erupted instead, landing squarely in Sebastian's perfectly styled hair. He closed his eyes, looking pained. "Miss Moon?" "Actually," Zara interrupted, floating between them, "his whole dark and mysterious thing could be exactly what you need. Think about it, Jules. The Coven's still mad about that time you turned their familiar gathering into an impromptu disco party. Sebastian's vampiric gravitas could help restore your reputation." "I don't even know what gravitas means," Juliet muttered, pacing the shop floor. Her hair crackled with nervous energy, while Sebastian remained unnaturally still, though his eye twitched slightly when a jar of pickled newt eggs began to spontaneously tap dance. The shop bell jingled again, and Mrs. Whiskerworth, the local cat lady, who was actually part cat herself, patted in on delicate feet that somehow managed to look both human and feline. Her golden eyes caught the afternoon light. "Oh? Sorry to interrupt, dears. Just needed my weekly catnip potion, running rather low, you see." "Welcome," Juliet practically shouted, her voice hitting an octave she didn't know she possessed, while Sebastian awkwardly shifted his spreadsheets behind his back. Her heart was racing like she'd just chugged 3 cups of her experimental coffee substitute. "We were just discussing inventory." "Very thoroughly," Sebastian added stiffly, looking about as comfortable as a vampire at a garlic festival. Zara floated on her back, cackling with the kind of glee only a ghost could muster at others' discomfort. "Oh yes, nothing suspicious here at all. Just a vampire and a witch having a totally normal conversation about inventory." She made air quotes that sent little ripples through her spectral form. Mrs. Whiskerworth's whiskers twitched suspiciously as she browsed the shelves, her tail swishing back and forth like a metronome counting out the awkward silence. Juliet could practically feel those feline eyes boring into her back. Once she'd left, Sebastian cleared his throat with the gravitas of someone about to announce the winner of a prestigious award. There is one other consideration. He paused dramatically. As a council candidate, I have access to their restricted magical archives. Juliet froze mid-ramble, her brain short-circuiting like one of her malfunctioning enchanted toasters. The archives? With all those ancient spellbooks and curse-breaking research? Her fingers tingled at the mere thought of all that magical knowledge. The very same. A hint of smugness crept into his voice, making him look irritatingly handsome. Of course, only council members and their significant others are permitted to browse the restricted sections. The possibility of finding a cure for her coven's curse warred with the absurdity of pretending to date Sebastian Lightfeather. Though she had to admit, the way he was standing there looking all tall, dark and meticulous was not entirely unfortunate. Even if his perfectionism made her want to deliberately mess up his color-coded filing system. Fine, she sighed, extending her hand and trying to ignore the way her stomach fluttered. Partners? The moment their hands met, every love potion on the nearest shelf popped its cork in celebration, showering them both in a rose-scented mist that smelled suspiciously like her grandmother's garden. Sebastian's perfectly gelled hair began to curl slightly at the ends, making him look almost approachable, while Juliet's turned a deeper shade of purple that would have made an eggplant jealous. Zara's ghostly laughter echoed through the shop. Oh, this is going to be good. Zara had witnessed a lot of ridiculous things in her afterlife, but watching Sebastian Lightfeather, vampire extraordinaire and professional brooder, propose a fake relationship to her best friend definitely topped the list. Now floating in lazy circles around Moonbeam Apothecary, she couldn't help but notice how Juliet kept obsessively wiping the same spot where Mr. Tall, Dark, and dramatically caped had stood, as if his perfectly polished shoes had left some sort of vampiric residue on her beloved wooden floors. Your presence sets my immortal heart aflame, Zara declared in her best gothic romance voice, clutching her ethereal pearls with all the theatrical flair she'd perfected since passing into the great beyond. Though I must maintain my stoic vampire dignity by only showing emotion through subtle eyebrow movements and the occasional tortured sigh. Juliet pointedly ignored her, which only encouraged Zara more. She drifted through the lingering magical residue from their meeting, using her ghostly energy to shape the sparkles into a miniature Sebastian, complete with an exaggerated pointed nose, ridiculously perfect posture, and that insufferably pristine cravat he always wore. The cash register dinged in agreement as Zara perched on the counter, her spectral form casting shimmering patterns on the ancient wood. And did you see that cape swoosh when he turned? Darling, I haven't witnessed that level of dramatic exit since The Vampire and the Werewolf's Second Cousin Twice Removed got cancelled in the middle of Season 3's love triangle reveal. I'm not listening, Juliet sang, grabbing random potion bottles to reorganize, her freckled face flushed. The moment her fingers touched the first bottle, it began humming the opening notes of Can't Help Falling in Love. Each subsequent bottle joined in, creating an impromptu supernatural orchestra that made Zara roll her translucent eyes. Oh, this is precious. Zara phased through the wall, popping back out, striking Sebastian's signature pose with one ethereal hand draped dramatically across her forehead. How quaint, she drawled, making each syllable sound like it had been starched, pressed, and stored in a century-old cedar chest. Your establishment has such rustic charm. Though perhaps a few less dancing dust bunnies would be appropriate for someone of my distinguished lineage? The shop's enchanted broom, never one to miss out on theatrics, began strutting across the floor in perfect imitation of Sebastian's measured gait, leaving little trails of sparkles in its wake. Zara floated alongside it, providing commentary like a supernatural fashion show host. And here we have their first date at Darkfang Diner. Watch out for those silver spoons, darling. Oh. And imagine him trying to maintain that perfect poise when your hiccuping happiness potion explodes. 10 centuries of vampire dignity, gone in one purple sparkly boom. We need to be serious for a minute, Juliet protested, though her twitching lips betrayed her amusement. She pulled out a piece of parchment labeled Relationship Rules. Fine, fine. Zara drifted over, peering at the list. Number 1, maintain professional boundaries. Boring, but necessary. Number 2, weekly planning meetings to coordinate schedules. Number 3. She grabbed the quill with a concentrated burst of energy. No brooding after midnight, it's just excessive. Zara? What? I'm helping. Now watch this. She swooped through the air, practicing her most menacing ghost impression, letting her ethereal form stretch and twist in ways that would make any living person deeply uncomfortable. This is how I'll handle Donovan if he gets too nosy. The shop's crystals caught her spectral glow, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls, making the entire room feel like a haunted disco. Boo? Your bacon treats can't save you now, wolf boy. A sudden glint caught their attention. There, leading to the door, was a trail of stubborn glitter clinging to the floorboards, following the exact path Sebastian had taken, like a sparkly breadcrumb trail of vampire dignity. Oh. My. Ghost? Zara bent down to examine it, her translucent form hovering inches from the floor. Mr. Perfectly Polished left with sparkles on his shoes. 10 centuries of vampiric grace undone by craft supplies. The mental image of Sebastian discovering glitter on his expensive footwear sent them both into fits of laughter. Juliet clutching her sides, while Zara's form rippled with mirth, temporarily losing cohesion and becoming a giggling cloud of ectoplasm. Still chuckling, Zara floated over to the enchanted mirror, striking various poses and watching her semi-transparent reflection flicker. How's this for my protective best friend look? She narrowed her eyes, making the mirror's surface ripple ominously, like a pond in a thunderstorm. Touch her heart, I touch your soul, literally. And trust me, ghostly possession is not a pleasant experience. The temperamental cauldron in the corner, which had been sulking since Sebastian's visit, finally decided to join the fun. It began burbling contentedly, sending up perfect heart-shaped smoke rings that drifted toward the ceiling, each one more obnoxiously romantic than the last. Et tu, cauldron? Zara rolled her eyes, matched perfectly by Juliet's exasperated expression. Even the cookware's getting sappy. I think that's enough excitement for one day, Juliet sighed, gathering her things. Zara phased through the open sign, flipping it to closed with a practiced spectral nudge. She began singing a playful tune about a certain vampire's woes, floating backward through the door while watching Juliet try not to smile at her ghostly antics. A cushion sailed through her incorporeal form, accompanied by Juliet's groan. That was terrible. Terribly accurate, Zara corrected with a ghostly wink. Just wait until he discovers the glitter. That's when the real brooding begins. Chapter 4, Love is a Battlefield. Sebastian adjusted the last rose in the antique crystal vase, precisely angling it 3 degrees to the left. Behind him, Bartholomew, his family's ghostly butler of 3 centuries, hovered with a fire extinguisher clutched in his translucent hands. Sir, perhaps we should position additional safety measures near the drapes? That won't be necessary, Sebastian said, though his fingers twitched as he straightened a fork that had strayed a millimeter out of alignment. Miss Moon assured me she has perfect control over her magic. Bartholomew's skeptical cough sounded suspiciously like third-degree burns. The enchanted mirror above the fireplace chimed in. Speaking of control, darling, you might want to check your reflection. You're doing that thing with your face again. Sebastian glanced up, catching sight of his stern expression. What thing? That, I'm plotting to overthrow a small supernatural kingdom look. Try for something more approachable? Think less ancient vampire lord, and more eligible bachelor. I don't plot, Sebastian caught himself adjusting his cravat for the 100th time. This is my normal expression. That's what worries me, dear. A surge of magical energy rippled through the manor's wards, announcing Juliet's arrival with all the subtlety of a unicorn in a china shop. Sebastian smoothed his jacket and strode to the entrance hall where Bartholomew was already opening the massive oak doors. Juliet Moon stood on his doorstep looking like a walking mood ring. Her cocktail dress shifted from midnight blue to sparkling purple as she fidgeted with her collection of magical charms. "Hi. Sorry if I'm late. Or early. I got nervous about the time and tried a quick transportation spell, but I think I briefly ended up in Singapore." "You're?" Sebastian checked his pocket watch. "Precisely on time, actually." "Oh? That's a first." She beamed, and her dress bloomed into a cheerful pink. A sprinkle of glitter cascaded from her hair. Sebastian led her to the dining room, hyper-aware of every jingling charm and trailing sparkle that threatened his manner's carefully curated atmosphere. "I took the liberty of arranging a formal table setting. Perhaps we should review the proper etiquette before the photographer arrives?" "Sure. I've totally got this. I watched 3 TikTok videos about fancy dining last night." Sebastian pinched the bridge of his nose. "Let's start with the basics. This is your salad fork, your fish fork, your meat fork." "Right, got it. Small to big, like a fork family tree." Juliet's hand gesture sent a spoon floating toward the ceiling. "Oops. Sorry, that happens when I'm nervous. It'll come down, eventually." A gravelly voice interrupted them. "The lighting is all wrong. We need more shadows, more brooding atmosphere." Their photographer, a 7-foot gargoyle named Granite, had arrived with an impressive array of equipment slung around his stone neck. The council voters expect gothic romance, not a tea party. "Perhaps if we," Sebastian began, but Juliet was already raising her wand. "I can help with that. Just a tiny illumination adjustment spell." "Miss Moon, that's not." The candle flames suddenly twisted into perfect heart shapes, before quadrupling in size. The antique lace tablecloth caught fire with impressive speed. Sebastian maintained his composure as he calmly reached for the fire extinguisher, but his eye developed a noticeable twitch when Juliet exclaimed, "Oh? The singed edges really add a certain je ne sais quoi to the ambiance, don't you think?" Bartholomew swooped in with supernatural efficiency, dousing the flames in a cloud of white foam that filled the room with an ethereal mist. "Perfect." Granite clicked his camera enthusiastically. "The fog, the tension, now that's chemistry." They somehow made it to dinner, where Sebastian watched in silent horror, as Juliet cheerfully stabbed her salad with a dessert fork. Yet as she launched into an animated story about accidentally turning her familiar into a disco ball, he found himself leaning forward, oddly captivated by her enthusiastic hand gestures and genuine laugh. The enchanted roses began to pulse with a soft golden light, humming a melody that sounded suspiciously like a love song. Granite's camera clicked rapidly in the background. "You have glitter on your jacket," Juliet pointed out between bites. Sebastian looked down at his pristine black wool, now sprinkled with tiny stars. Before he could express his dismay, Granite lumbered over with his camera display. "Take a look at these shots. You two are natural together, like darkness and starlight." The photos were surprising. Where Sebastian expected to see awkward poses and magical chaos, he instead found moments of genuine warmth. Even the shot of Juliet falling into his arms looked elegantly choreographed rather than accidental. Later, as he walked her to the door, Sebastian couldn't help but notice how the manor's usually gloomy corridors seemed to brighten in Juliet's wake, as if the very stones were coming alive with her passing. Behind them, Bartholomew dusted the glitter-strewn floor with a knowing smile that Sebastian pointedly ignored. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Juliet said, her dress settling into a soft lavender. "Even if I did almost burn down your ancestral home." The tablecloth was from the Victorian era. It had a good run. By morning, the photographs were everywhere. The Supernatural Gazette's front page featured their candlelit dinner. Sebastian's usually stern expression softened as he watched Juliet gesture animatedly about something. The magical community's social media feeds buzzed with shots of them dodging the tablecloth fire, their synchronized movements more graceful than panicked. Even the council's official newsletter included a tastefully edited image of them sharing what appeared to be an intimate moment over dessert, though Sebastian distinctly remembered that particular shot coinciding with Juliet accidentally enchanting her spoon to serenade them. The full moon hung like a spotlight in Gloamwood Park's perpetual fog, casting silvery shadows that danced across Juliet's purple hair as she consulted her temperamental spellbook. The ancient tome snapped at her fingers for the third time, nearly causing her to drop her basket of carefully collected ingredients. "Listen here, you cranky collection of paper cuts," Juliet muttered, wrestling the book open with one hand. "I've already sweet-talked the vervain into blooming early. Don't make me get creative with your binding spell." The book huffed, but stayed open to the page on luminescent fungi, its ancient pages crackling with what Juliet swore was annoyance. She crouched near a patch of glowing mushrooms, their caps pulsing with a gentle blue-green light that reminded her of underwater caves she'd seen in her mother's crystal ball readings. The twisted trees around her creaked closer, their branches reaching down like curious fingers, spreading shadows that danced across her spellbook's temperamental pages. "Oh, stop being so nosy," she told the nearest oak, which had the decency to look embarrassed and straighten up slightly, its leaves rustling in what could only be described as a sheepish manner. "I'm just here for some midnight mushrooms. Nothing exciting to see. Though I suppose that depends on whether my spell actually works this time." She began the harvesting charm, her fingers weaving delicate patterns in the air as she recalled her grandmother's lessons about proper magical gestures. "Luminous fungorum, gentle and bright, release your caps in the dark of night." Her foot slipped on the damp grass, crushing one of the mushroom caps with an awkward squeak of her rain boots. A cloud of sparkling spores exploded upward, catching her mid-incantation and tickling her nose with their magical essence. The sneeze that followed was spectacular and rainbow-colored, just like that disaster at last year's spring equinox celebration. Achoo! Multiple colors burst from her nose like magical confetti, creating tiny auroras in the fog that swirled around her head like a technicolor halo. "Oh, sugar and spice, this is definitely not what the spellbook meant by harvesting the ethereal essence." "Truly impressive technique," a familiar dry voice cut through the mist. "I particularly enjoyed the part where you turned yourself into a walking aurora borealis. Very festive." Sebastian materialized from the fog like he'd been conjured, not a hair out of place despite the humidity that was turning Juliet's own hair into something resembling a purple dandelion that had picked a fight with static electricity. His tailored black coat somehow managed to look crisp even in the damp air, and Juliet felt a twinge of envy at his perpetual composure. "I don't recall ordering a critique of my harvesting methods," Juliet said, grabbing a handful of glowing mushrooms. She gestured with them emphatically, sending tiny spores spinning through the air like minute shooting stars. "And I suppose you're an expert on midnight mushroom gathering? Or did you just come to add your particular brand of vampire judgment to my evening?" Sebastian dodged a shower of spores with vampiric grace, his movement so fluid it made Juliet's clumsy fumbling feel even more pronounced. "Any fool knows you're supposed to approach them from the north side to avoid triggering their defense mechanisms. Though I must admit your light show is rather more entertaining." "Any fool also knows that's complete nonsense," Juliet retorted. "These mushrooms are attracted to emotional energy. They don't care about cardinal directions." As if proving her point, the mushroom patch began spreading rapidly, creating a circle of pulsing light around their feet. The fungi seemed to stretch upward, reaching for their bickering energy like plants seeking sunlight. "Here," Sebastian stepped closer, forced by the expanding ring of mushrooms. "Allow me to demonstrate the proper technique." He crouched down with impossible elegance, reached for a mushroom cap, and promptly caused it to release an explosion of spores that settled in his perfect black hair like stars in the night sky. His expression of dignified outrage was too much for Juliet. She pressed her lips together, trying to contain her laughter, but when their eyes met, his twinkling despite his scowl, she lost it completely. Her giggles echoed through the fog as Sebastian's hair sparkled with every movement. The remaining mushrooms suddenly burst into synchronized blooming, releasing musical notes with each pulse of light. The sound was something between wind chimes and laughter, creating an otherworldly symphony around them. "Well, this is just perfect," Sebastian muttered, now trapped with her in the center of what appeared to be a very enthusiastic fungal light show. "I suppose you have a solution for this situation?" "Me?" Juliet raised her eyebrows, causing more spores to cascade from her hair. "I thought you were the expert on all things mushroom-related, Mr. Cardinal Directions." "At least my method doesn't result in impromptu disco lighting," he shot back, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "No, yours just turns you into a walking constellation map." She took a step toward him, and promptly slipped on the damp grass. Sebastian's hands shot out to steady her, pulling her upright before she could face plant into the musical mushrooms. The motion brought them nose to nose, close enough that Juliet could see the tiny spores caught in his impossibly long eyelashes. "If we're going to break this curse," he said softly, still holding her arms, "perhaps we should combine our expertise rather than argue about methodology." The nearby willow tree sighed audibly, its branches swaying despite the still air. Juliet became acutely aware of Sebastian's hands on her arms, how his usual cool demeanor seemed slightly warmer in the mushroom's glow. "I suppose," she managed, "that there might be some merit to approaching from the north side." "Sometimes. Rarely." "And I suppose," he replied, a rare smile tugging at his lips, "that emotional energy might have some influence on magical fungi." They worked together to gather the remaining mushrooms, their movements becoming a kind of dance as they avoided the still spreading circle of light. Juliet pretended not to notice how the fungi dimmed whenever they stepped apart, or how they brightened enthusiastically when their hands brushed while reaching for the same cap. The enchanted pond nearby rippled with what looked suspiciously like heart shapes, but Juliet blamed that on the fog playing tricks with the moonlight. She definitely wasn't thinking about how Sebastian's hair still sparkled, or how he'd stopped trying to brush the spores away, or how his smile seemed a little less practiced and a little more real with each passing moment. "Your basket's full," Sebastian observed, breaking into her thoughts. "Unless you're planning to start a mushroom farm in your pocket." "Right," Juliet said, realizing she'd been absent-mindedly picking the same mushroom for the past minute. "I think we've traumatized enough fungi for one night." Chapter 5: Donovan Sniffs Trouble. Through the grimy window of Darkfang Diner, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Donovan's usual booth, the one with the perfect sightline to both entrances and minimal exposure to that irritating supernatural-themed neon sign that always flickered during the full moon. He slouched deeper into the cracked leather seat, spreading his collection of evidence across the sticky tabletop while fishing for his family-size bag of Howlin' Good bacon bites. "Still working on that exposé, sugar?" The ghostly waitress, Mabel, drifted through his table, sending an arctic chill through his bones and mysteriously tipping his coffee cup. The dark liquid crept dangerously close to his prized notebook. "For the love of—" Donovan snatched up his papers, shooting Mabel a yellow-eyed glare. "Some of us are trying to practice serious journalism here." Him. Mabel's translucent form shimmered with barely concealed amusement. "More coffee?" He waved her off, his enhanced hearing already picking up something more interesting from the booth behind him. "Saw them at Gloamstone Manor last night," a young vampire was saying, her voice practically dripping with envy. Sebastian actually smiled. "Like, with teeth and everything." "No way," her companion gasped. "The Sebastian Lightfeather?" Donovan's pen moved across his notebook. Subject displays uncharacteristic behavior, possible enchantment? He spread out his latest photographs, carefully arranged in chronological order. The manor photoshoot looked suspiciously perfect, Sebastian's aristocratic profile softened by candlelight, Juliet's purple hair catching the shadows just so. But it was the mushroom-gathering photos that really set his journalistic instincts tingling. He'd captured them mid-argument, Sebastian's hand on Juliet's waist as he'd steadied her near a patch of suspiciously glowing fungi. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Nashgrafer's distinctive scent, pine needles and poorly concealed heartache, filled the air. Donovan casually lifted his phone, angling it to capture the other werewolf's reaction, as he scrolled past yet another sickeningly sweet social media update from Evergloam's newest power couple. Nash's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Subject exhibits clear signs of emotional distress regarding relationship, Donovan noted, right before the diner's ancient jukebox crackled to life. I see a bad moon rising. John Fogerty's voice wailed across the diner. Oh, come on. Donovan growled, adding another tally mark to his suspicious coincidences column. The timing of their public appearances was too perfect, too calculated. It reeked of orchestration. He flagged down Mabel, who materialized with an exaggerated sigh. The cook mentioned something about a special order yesterday? You mean Sebastian's usual? AB negative with a splash of cinnamon, Donovan finished. Since when does Sebastian Lightfeather drink flavored blood? Hey Donnie. A gruff voice called from the counter. Still chasing conspiracy theories? The pen in Donovan's grip snapped, spraying ink across his meticulously organized timeline. Several nearby patrons snickered as he dabbed furiously at the mess with a napkin, smearing the evidence further. Undeterred, he pulled out a fresh notebook, connecting dates and locations with red string illustrations that would have made any conspiracy theorist proud. The timeline was there, hidden beneath the perfectly curated social media posts and convenient public sightings. He just needed one solid piece of evidence to crack the case wide open. Another handful of bacon bites disappeared as he worked, grease spots joining the ink stains on his rumpled sleeve. Catching his reflection in the window, Donovan noticed his tie had migrated somewhere north of his left ear. He straightened it with a scowl, unable to ignore how Sebastian's immaculate appearance made him look like something dragged backward through Gloamwood Park. The diner's magical suggestion board flickered, its ghostly letters rearranging themselves. Today's special, mind your own business burger with a side of get-a-life fries. More Snickers. Donovan slumped lower in his booth, his yellow eyes fixed on the photograph of Sebastian and Juliet at last week's Supernatural Farmers Market. They looked perfect together, too perfect. The way Sebastian's hand rested possessively on Juliet's shoulder, how her smile reached her eyes exactly the right amount. His phone buzzed. Where's that story, Lupescu? Need more than theories and cold coffee stains. Donovan's upper lip curled, revealing the edge of a fang. He studied the photo again, noting how the sunset caught Juliet's hair at precisely the most flattering angle, how Sebastian's usually stern expression had softened just enough to seem candid while remaining aristocratically composed. With decisive strokes, he circled the word fake across his notes, pressing so hard the paper nearly tore. Got you, he muttered, reaching for another bacon bite, only to have the bag float away as Mabel drifted past, releasing a theatrical moan that sent shivers down his spine. Half his remaining snacks scattered across the floor as he jumped, earning him another round of barely stifled laughter from the other patrons. But Donovan barely noticed, his attention fixed on the evidence before him. Let them laugh. Soon enough, he'd expose this charade for what it really was, and then... The jukebox crackled again. I see trouble on the way. Oh, shut up, Donovan growled, but his yellow eyes gleamed with determination as he began plotting his next move. Juliet slumped over the counter of Moonbeam Apothecary, surrounded by the wreckage of her latest curse-breaking attempts. A smoking grimoire to her left wheezed out purple sparks, while 3 failed potions bubbled ominously in their bottles, each a more alarming shade of nope than the last. The judgmental crystal ball she'd splurged on last week kept replaying scenes of her Coven members' dating disasters, complete with tiny thought bubbles showing their growing resentment toward her. Oh, stop it, she muttered at the crystal ball, which responded by showing her tripping into Sebastian at their next public appearance. That's not helpful. A familiar chill swept through the shop as Zara phased through the ceiling, trailing ethereal sparkles. Her ghostly eyebrows shot up. Honey, your hair's gone full sad grape popsicle. Has it? Juliet tugged at a limp strand. Fantastic. Just what I needed. The temperamental cauldron in the corner burped out a sympathetic stream of purple bubbles that popped in tiny sighs. The shop's enchanted broom, sensing her distress, abandoned its post by the door and began sweeping elaborate heart shapes around her feet. Unfortunately, This stirred up the residual glitter from her original curse, creating a sparkly cloud that made her sneeze. I can't do this anymore, Z. Juliet gestured at the chaos around her, accidentally causing all the potion bottles on the nearby shelf to transform into mood indicators. They shifted through various shades of anxiety blue, creating a depressing rainbow. Every attempt makes things worse. Did you know Maple's date last night turned into a toad? Not even a cute toad. A warty one with an attitude problem. Watch this. Zara floated to the center of the shop, assuming a dramatic pose. Here's how we'll handle our furry little problem. She proceeded to act out an elaborate haunting scenario, complete with sound effects. First, we'll hit him with the classic cold spot. She made spooky noises while pretending to be Donovan, hopping from foot to foot. Then, when he's good and jumpy, she mimed dangling something. We float his precious bacon just out of reach. Zara? But Juliet was fighting a smile now. The shop's bell chimed, interrupting their plotting. Margot, one of her Coven members, stormed in with her aura crackling dangerous shades of frustration. Juliet straightened, plastering on her best everything's fine smile. Margot? How was your? Don't ask. Margot's eye twitched. Unless you want to hear about how my date spoke entirely in limericks. Bad ones. About his mother's cookie recipes. The guilt hit Juliet like a blast from a miscast cheering charm. Before she could respond, Zara positioned herself between them, deliberately lowering the temperature until Margot's teeth chattered. Oh? Must be a draft, Margot said, already backing toward the door. I'll just come back later. Once they were alone again, Juliet reached for her most temperamental teapot, the one she saved for emergencies. Tea? The teapot remained stubbornly still, its spout turned up like a snooty nose. Zara cleared her throat and launched into an elaborate serenade. O most elegant and distinguished of vessels, your gleaming surface outshines the finest silver, your handle curves with the grace of a swan's neck. The teapot preened and finally poured, and Juliet found herself giggling despite everything. Right, Zara announced, floating to the counter and passing her transparent hand through a notebook, making the pages flip. Operation Outsmart Donnie Lupescu, commence. He hates being called Donnie, Juliet pointed out, sipping her tea. Exactly. Zara grinned wickedly. Item 1. Replace his bacon-flavored dog treats with vegetarian alternatives. Zara? Item 2. Possess his notepad and fill it with terrible supernatural romance poetry. There once was a werewolf named Donnie, whose nose was exceptionally bonny. As Juliet reached for the notebook, a photo slipped from her grimoire. It was from the dinner shoot with Sebastian, capturing the moment just before she'd set the tablecloth on fire. He wasn't quite smiling, but there was something soft in his expression as he looked at her across the candles. Her hair shifted to a warmer shade of purple. The shop's crystals began humming in harmony, a sound like tiny wind chimes catching a summer breeze. Zara, meanwhile, had progressed to acting out increasingly elaborate haunting scenarios. And then, she declared, floating near the ceiling, we convince his pen to write nothing but knock-knock jokes about vampires. That's ridiculous. But Juliet was fully smiling now, her hair almost back to its usual vibrant shade. Ridiculous is what we do best. Zara helped her gather the day's failed attempts, directing the enchanted broom as they cleaned. Neither of them commented when the swept-up pile formed a perfect heart shape, though Juliet noticed her friend's knowing smirk. So, Zara said, what's the plan? Juliet glanced at the photo again, then at her friend. First, we need more bacon. Being a ghost had its perks. Zara drifted through Evergloam's bustling streets, phasing between shops with gleeful abandon as she conducted her daily reconnaissance mission. The latest entertainment? Watching Donovan Lupescu slowly lose his mind trying to crack the case of Sebastian and Juliet's relationship. Oh honey, you look rough, she muttered, hovering near the journalist as he slumped over his fourth cup of coffee at Darkfang Diner. His usually pressed shirt was wrinkled, and his tie hung askew like a dejected flag of surrender. Even his notepad looked stressed, covered in coffee rings and frantic scribbles. Zara couldn't resist. She floated closer, peeking over his shoulder at the hastily scrawled notes. Subject J spotted buying couples matching potion vials. SL actually smiled in public? Suspicious? Amateur hour, she snickered, causing a cold breeze that made Donovan shiver and clutch his bacon-scented stress ball tighter. Phase 1 of surveillance complete, Zara zipped through the wall into Glomstone Manor's study, where Sebastian was engaged in what appeared to be an intense debate with his ghostly butler, Reginald, over wardrobe choices. Perhaps the obsidian cravat with silver threading, sir? Reginald suggested, his translucent form wavering anxiously. It speaks of authority, while maintaining an approachable air. Sebastian, surrounded by a fortress of color-coded planners, barely looked up. The silver might be too flashy for the council meeting, but perhaps for the charity ball. He made a precise notation in his schedule, which Zara noticed was dotted with little purple stars, next to events involving Juliet. Interesting, Zara whispered, making a mental note to tease Juliet about this later. Speaking of her best friend, Zara found Juliet in the midst of what could only be described as a fashion catastrophe at Moonbeam Apothecary. Every piece of formal wear she owned was now cycling through colors based on her emotions, currently a nauseating swirl of anxiety yellow and determination orange. I was just trying to look more sophisticated, Juliet wailed, as a cocktail dress shifted from embarrassed pink to frustrated red. How am I supposed to attend the council gala, looking like a magical mood ring? At least you'll be the most honest person there, Zara quipped, materializing fully. Besides, Sebastian might appreciate knowing exactly how you feel about him. Zara? Juliet squeaked, her dress immediately flooding with mortified purple. Leaving her friend to her chromatic crisis, Zara drifted toward the kitchen of Darkfang Diner, where Nash was stress-baking his feelings away. The latest issue of Supernatural Society Weekly lay crumpled nearby, its headline screaming Lightfeather and Moon, a match made in moonlight. Above a photo of the couple attempting a waltz. Those cookies won't bake themselves any faster if you keep glaring at them, Zara commented, watching Nash aggressively pipe wolfsbane frosting onto another batch. I'm not glaring, Nash muttered, though his amber eyes flickered briefly to the magazine. I'm concentrating on proper piping technique. Aha. And I'm alive and breathing. Curiosity piqued by the mounting drama, Zara ventured to Luce Thornshade's private chambers, where the Fae was putting on quite the show. Her assistant, a nervous sprite named Pip, frantically scribbled notes as Luce practiced what appeared to be her devastatingly beautiful but approachable smile in an enchanted mirror. Note his aversion to direct sunlight, Luce instructed, adjusting her silvery hair. We'll schedule the debate for noon. And add that he gets flustered when anyone mentions his last name. We can work with that. Zara rolled her eyes. Politicians. Back at the newspaper office, Donovan had graduated from pacing to full-on theatrical monologuing. I know you're hiding something, Lightfeather, he declared to his bacon-scented stress ball, which looked thoroughly unimpressed. And I'm going to prove it. Zara couldn't resist making faces behind him, adding bunny ears to his shadow and jotting down ideas for her next haunting session. Maybe some mysterious wind to scatter his evidence files. Or perhaps his coffee could mysteriously taste like garlic for a week. The real gold mine of gossip, however, was the secret SCREAM council meeting. Zara phased through the ceiling just in time to hear High Counselor Bloodworth announce the latest odds. 3-1 they're faking it, declared a vampire elder, sliding a vial of ancient blood across the table. 5-1 they started fake but caught feelings, countered a witch, pushing forward a bag of rare crystals. The enchanted ledger recorded each bet in sparkly ink that seemed to wink knowingly at Zara. Back at Glomstone Manor, Zara witnessed something that made her non-existent heart skip a beat. Sebastian, finding glitter on his jacket, undoubtedly from Juliet's latest magical mishap, didn't immediately vanish it away. Instead, he carefully collected it in a small crystal vial, which he placed in his desk drawer with surprising gentleness. Well, Zara murmured. Looks like someone's going soft. The town's magic seemed to agree. At Moonbeam Apothecary, Juliet's collection of magical charms had started an impromptu concert, belting out love songs whenever anyone mentioned Sebastian. Juliet had stuffed them in a drawer, but Zara could still hear the muffled strains of Love Potion number 9 seeping through the wood. Even Evergloam's timepieces were getting in on the action. The clock tower's mechanisms whirred with unusual enthusiasm, its hands moving in patterns that seemed more like dance steps than timekeeping. Smaller watches and clocks throughout town had taken to chiming in harmony, creating what sounded suspiciously like wedding bells. Most telling of all was the shadow mirror in Sebastian's study. Zara had made it her personal mission to check it daily, and today's reflection showed Sebastian and Juliet sharing tea in the manor's garden, both laughing as magical butterflies danced around them. The real Sebastian, adjusting his cravat nearby, pretended not to notice, but Zara caught him stealing glances at the scene with an expression that definitely wasn't annoyance. As evening settled over Evergloam, Zara watched the town prepare for the upcoming council gala. Juliet tottered around her shop in magical heels that kept trying to waltz without her permission. Sebastian practiced small talk with his reflection, looking like he'd rather face a sunrise. Donovan arranged his evidence into elaborate conspiracy theory boards, while Nash's stress baking had reached industrial levels. And through it all, Evergloam's magic hummed with anticipation, like the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when pretense would give way to truth. Not that Zara was worried, she had plans of her own to ensure things went exactly as they should. After all, what were best friends, and particularly meddlesome ghosts, for? Chapter 6: Dancing with Disaster. Sebastian suppressed a wince as another shower of glitter drifted from Juliet's hair onto his immaculate black suit. The velvet veins' crystal skull chandeliers caught each sparkle, multiplying the effect until he felt like a disco ball with fangs. Still, he kept his expression neutral as they crossed the threshold, his hand hovering at the small of her back in what he hoped appeared to be an affectionate gesture rather than an attempt to prevent any magical mishaps. "This is amazing." Juliet bounced on her toes, her mismatched magical charms jingling like a one-witch percussion section. "Look at those skulls. Are they real?" "Please don't ask that so loudly," Sebastian murmured, noting several aristocratic vampires turning their heads with the sort of synchronized judgment that came from centuries of practiced disdain. "The answer involves a rather unfortunate incident with a necromancer and an interior decorator with questionable taste. And an extremely lengthy lawsuit." A familiar chill crept across his skin, the telltale sign of approaching Phi magic that always reminded him unpleasantly of frozen spiderwebs. Sebastian barely contained his grimace as Luce Thornshade materialized beside them, her violet eyes gleaming like poisoned amethysts in the flickering chandelier light. "Sebastian, darling," Luce purred, her silvery hair catching the light in ways that defied physics and probably several local ordinances. "How unexpected to see you here. And with such..." Her gaze flickered over Juliet's constellation of quirky charms and slightly frazzled purple hair, each pause calculated to draw maximum attention. "Unique company." The spell-infused DJ booth, sensing the shift in emotional atmosphere like a gossip-hungry teenager, smoothly transitioned into an ethereal Phi melody. The haunting notes wove through the crowd, drawing attention to their little tableau like moths to a particularly dramatic flame. "Luce?" Sebastian inclined his head with centuries-practiced politeness while positioning himself slightly in front of Juliet, an old protective instinct he couldn't quite suppress. "Attempting to influence the music again, I see. Some might consider that an unfair advantage. Merely adding some culture to the evening." Luce's smile didn't reach her eyes, which remained as warm as midwinter frost. "Though I suppose your companion might prefer something more contemporary?" Sebastian's enhanced hearing picked up the whispers she'd already set in motion, spreading through the crowd like poison in wine. "A hedge witch? Did you see those charms? Lightfeather must be desperate for attention." His jaw clenched, but Juliet seemed blissfully absorbed in watching a group of pixies throwing back shots of nectar, their tiny wings creating prismatic light shows with each toss. "You simply must join us on the dance floor," Luce announced, gliding backward with inhuman grace. Her movements left trails of starlight in her wake, drawing appreciative murmurs from the gathering crowd. Unless, of course, you're not up to the challenge? Before Sebastian could formulate a diplomatic rejection, Juliet's warm hand slipped into his. "Trust me," she whispered, her green eyes sparkling with mischief. He felt a tingling sensation in his feet, and looked down to find their shoes emitting a soft, pulsing glow. "What did you just—" he started, but she was already pulling him onto the dance floor. Luce's performance was flawless, of course. Butterfly wings of light unfurled from her shoulders as she moved, and stardust rained from her fingertips with practiced precision. The crowd pressed closer, enchanted by the display of Phi magic, their admiring whispers grating against Sebastian's heightened vampire hearing. He recognized the calculated nature of her dance, every gesture designed to captivate, every sparkle meant to intimidate. But Juliet danced like magic itself was having a party. She guided Sebastian through steps that somehow matched the ethereal music while completely defying it, her warm hand steady in his despite her apparent chaos. Each movement sent cascades of sparkles into the air, not the accidental shedding from before, but intentional bursts that transformed the dance floor into their own private galaxy. Sebastian found himself oddly mesmerized by the way the lights caught in her frazzled purple hair. "You're doing this on purpose," Sebastian muttered as she spun under his arm, leaving a spiral of luminescent sparkles in her wake. The tingling sensation in his feet had spread to his entire body, making him feel uncommonly light. "Maybe," she grinned, and the crystal skulls overhead began pulsing in rhythm with their movements, their hollow eyes winking at the dancers below. "Is that a smile I detect, Mr. Lightfeather?" "Absolutely not," he replied, fighting to maintain his dignified expression even as he found himself enjoying the ridiculousness of it all. The way she moved with such unselfconscious joy was infectious. For a moment, he almost forgot about the countless eyes watching them, about the political implications of every step. A discordant note cut through the Phi melody, as Juliet's chaos magic apparently convinced the DJ booth to switch tracks. The ethereal music scratched to a halt, replaced by an upbeat pop song that had several younger vampires whooping in approval. Sebastian recognized the tune as one that had been playing incessantly at blood banks lately, not that he'd ever admit to knowing such a modern composition. Luce froze mid-twirl, her perfect composure cracking as her butterfly wings flickered and vanished. "This is completely—" The rest of her protest was drowned out by cheers, as Juliet led Sebastian through a final spin that showered the crowd in harmless sparks. He caught glimpses of council members nodding approvingly, clearly impressed by his willingness to participate in such an impromptu display. "Beau," Juliet whispered, tugging his hand. "It's showmanship." Sebastian complied, trying to ignore how natural it felt to hold her hand, how the warmth of her fingers seemed to linger against his perpetually cool skin. He deliberately avoided looking toward the VIP section, where he could hear Luce's frigid commentary about unseemly behavior unbefitting a council candidate. But as Juliet beamed up at him, her purple hair wild and her eyes bright with triumph, Sebastian found himself wondering if perhaps unseemly behavior had its merits after all. That, she declared, was way more fun than a stuffy networking event. That, he corrected, brushing glitter from his sleeve, was a diplomatic nightmare. And the corner of his mouth twitched. Surprisingly effective. Juliet's dance shoes continued their rhythmic pulsing as she stepped onto the club's secluded balcony, casting a soft rosy glow with each footfall. The cool night air was a welcome relief after the dance-off, and she quickly spotted Sebastian leaning against the ornate railing, his profile illuminated by moonlight. Her heart did a little skip, whether from the lingering adrenaline of dancing or his presence, she wasn't quite sure. "Found your brooding spot, I see," she teased, moving to stand beside him. A shimmer caught her eye, and she had to bite back a giggle. Her magical sparkles from the dance had settled in his perfectly styled hair, transforming the usually imposing vampire into something resembling a grumpy pixie who'd lost a fight with a glitter bomb. The effect was oddly endearing, though she doubted he'd appreciate that observation. The sounds of the velvet veins' thumping bass faded as an enchanted silence enveloped them. Juliet fidgeted with her charm bracelet, the tiny magical trinkets tinkling in the quiet. A miniature silver cauldron clinked against a crescent moon charm as she twisted the bracelet around her wrist. The familiar motion usually calmed her nerves, but tonight it only seemed to amplify the butterflies in her stomach. "Your dancing was unexpectedly competent," Sebastian said, his voice softer than usual. He brushed at his sleeve, sending a cascade of glitter to the ground. "Though I'll be finding sparkles in unfortunate places for weeks." The complaint lacked his typical exasperation, and Juliet caught the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Around them, the balcony's potted flowers began to stir, their buds unfurling and emanating a gentle phosphorescence that matched the rhythm of her shoes. She noticed with mild embarrassment that the flowers seemed to be leaning toward them, as if trying to eavesdrop on their conversation. Her magic had a tendency to make even plants nosy sometimes. "I just hope it was enough to convince everyone," Juliet sighed, her earlier confidence wavering. "My coven's already disappointed in me after the whole curse fiasco, and if they find out about this fake relationship on top of everything else," she gestured wildly, nearly toppling a large flowering vine. Sebastian's hand shot out, catching her arm and steadying her. "Careful," he murmured, his cool fingers lingering on her skin. "You're not the only one dealing with expectations, you know." His thumb traced an absent pattern on her arm as he stared into the distance. "Try having centuries of family legacy weighing on your shoulders, along with a surname that sounds like it belongs to a rejected fairy tale character." "Lightfeather," Juliet repeated with a snort, and Sebastian's dramatic eye roll sent her into a fit of giggles. A streak of silver light cut across the sky, drawing their attention upward. Juliet's breath caught as she realized how close they were standing, Sebastian's hand still resting on her arm, their faces tilted toward the stars. The moment felt delicate, like a soap bubble that might pop at the slightest disturbance. Her heart fluttered traitorously in her chest, and she could have sworn the temperature around them dropped a few degrees, probably just a vampire thing, she told herself firmly. Naturally, that's when her charm bracelet decided to betray her. A tiny tinny version of "Can't Help Falling in Love" began playing from the heart-shaped charm Zara had gifted her as a joke. Heat rushed to Juliet's cheeks as she fumbled with the bracelet, her fingers refusing to cooperate as they tangled in the delicate chain. Sebastian cleared his throat and took a measured step backward, though she caught the hint of an amused smile playing at the corner of his mouth. A muffled crunch drew their attention to a suspiciously large fern near the balcony door. Donovan's notepad stuck out from behind the leaves, and the unmistakable scent of bacon-flavored chips wafted their way. The journalist wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore, she thought with exasperation. Juliet pressed her lips together, trying to contain her laughter as Sebastian's shoulders began to shake with silent mirth. She had to admit, there was something oddly comforting about having a common enemy to share these ridiculous moments with. "I believe your article might need some fact-checking, Lupescu," Sebastian called out, causing a startled rustle from behind the plant. "That's not even your usual stakeout snack brand." Juliet's laughter bubbled over, and she had to lean against the railing for support. Sebastian turned toward her, his expression softening as he reached out to brush something from her cheek. His fingers froze against her skin as their eyes met, and around them every flower on the balcony burst into synchronized bloom, their petals glowing like tiny lanterns. "We should?" Juliet started, her voice barely above a whisper. "The party," Sebastian agreed quickly, dropping his hand. "Luce will be suspicious if we're gone too long." "Right? The party. Because this is all for show." Juliet smoothed her dress, pointedly ignoring how the magical atmosphere of the club had shifted to match her racing pulse. Above them, the moon seemed to twinkle mischievously, as if sharing a private joke with the glowing flowers. "Shall we?" Sebastian offered his arm with exaggerated formality, though something in his expression made Juliet's heart skip. "Lead the way, Mr. Lightfeather," she replied with a mock curtsy, delighting in his resigned sigh as they headed back toward the pulsing music and watchful eyes of the supernatural elite. Behind them, Donovan's pen scratched furiously against his notepad, accompanied by the continuous crunching of subpar bacon chips. Chapter 7, Secrets in the Shadows. Sebastian paced the length of Glomstone Manor's library, his footsteps muffled by the worn burgundy carpet. Ancient tomes floated at various heights around him, a testament to his family's peculiar organizational system. The books drifted lazily in the moonlight streaming through the Gothic windows, their shadows creating an ethereal dance across the floor. Sebastian paced the length of Glomstone Manor's library, his footsteps muffled by the worn burgundy carpet. Ancient tomes floated at various heights around him, a testament to his family's peculiar organizational system. The books drifted lazily in the moonlight streaming through the Gothic windows, their shadows creating an ethereal dance across the floor. "There has to be a logical explanation," he muttered, running a hand through his usually immaculate hair, grimacing as he felt the strands fall out of place. The gesture betrayed his growing frustration with the recent complications in his carefully constructed plan. 3 centuries of meticulous control, and now everything seemed to be unraveling faster than a werewolf's winter sweater. A pulse of energy caught his attention mid-stride, making the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The shadow mirror, mounted on the far wall between towering bookshelves, rippled with an unusual light that made his ancient blood run even colder than usual. Sebastian froze, narrowing his eyes at the artifact that had been in his family for generations. Instead of his reflection, the surface shimmered with familiar purple sparkles, the exact shade of Juliet's hair, that impossibly chaotic witch who had somehow wormed her way into his thoughts. Absolutely not. He turned away with a sharp motion of his cloak, only to notice a particularly heavy grimoire hovering insistently at eye level, like an attention-seeking familiar. The tome's ancient leather binding, worn smooth by centuries of handling, bore the title Magical Artifacts Through the Ages, in faded gold lettering that seemed to mock him with its relevance. Sebastian reached for it, his fingers barely grazing the spine, when the book jerked away with what he could have sworn was deliberate defiance. The motion triggered a chain reaction. Several nearby volumes wobbled precariously before tumbling from their floating positions like dominoes in an invisible breeze. They crashed to the ground, pages fluttering open in what couldn't possibly be coincidence, each one displaying passages about magical bonds and destined connections. The sound echoed through the library's vaulted ceiling, making him wince at the disarray in his normally pristine sanctuary. Moon family lineage, he read from the nearest fallen book, his aristocratic features pinched with irritation. Moon witches in the 16th century. Notable moon enchantments. Each volume had opened to passages about Juliet's family, as if the library itself was conspiring against his determination to remain uninvolved. The shadow mirror pulsed again, more insistently this time, its ancient magic thrumming through the room like a heartbeat. Sebastian approached with one of the books, fighting his growing unease as the mirror's surface rippled like dark water. Images flickered across its depths, a moon witch with silver hair working alongside a vampire in antiquated clothing, their hands joined over a cauldron, their faces alight with shared purpose. Another scene showed a different pair examining runes by candlelight, their heads bent together in scholarly intimacy. "This proves nothing," Sebastian said to the empty library, though his voice lacked conviction. The words tasted hollow on his tongue, centuries of practiced detachment crumbling beneath the weight of mounting evidence. A flutter of movement caught his eye, drawing his attention like a moth to flame. Behind a shelf that had shifted in the commotion, something gleamed in the moonlight streaming through the library's Gothic windows. Sebastian pushed aside several floating books, their pages rustling in protest, to reveal a dust-covered painting in an ornate frame. His breath caught, the familiar ache of hunger momentarily forgotten. The artwork depicted a scene that made his carefully ordered world tilt slightly off its axis. A witch with familiar green eyes, clearly a moon ancestor, stood before an early version of the shadow mirror, her pose radiating the same infectious confidence he'd come to associate with Juliet. Beside her, a vampire with Sebastian's own sharp features held her hand as they channeled magic into the artifact's surface, their combined power visible as threads of silver and gold. Ancient text curved around the painting's border, the letters seeming to shimmer in the dim light. Sebastian's fingers traced the words, translating the archaic script with growing trepidation. Through mirror dark and fates entwined, moon and Lightfeather powers combined. The prophecy settled over him like a weighted cloak, impossible to ignore or deny. The library seemed to respond to his mounting anxiety. Books shuffled nervously on their shelves, their pages rustling like whispered conversations. Candles flickered in their holders, casting jumping shadows that the mirror caught and amplified. Its surface now swirled with dramatic patterns, reflecting his inner turmoil rather than his physical form. Sebastian retreated to his desk, pulling out one of his signature color-coded files, purple, he realized with an ironic twist to his lips. His normally precise handwriting turned jagged as he documented his findings, ink blotching where his hand pressed too hard against the paper. A sudden flash from the mirror made him look up. The chaotic shadows had cleared, revealing a crystal-clear image of Juliet in her apothecary. She stirred a cauldron, her purple hair escaping its messy bun and on her finger. The inkwell crashed to the floor as Sebastian jerked back in his chair. On her hand gleamed his family's signet ring, the one locked safely in his desk drawer at this very moment. "This is ridiculous," he said, though the mirror's surface rippled as if laughing at his denial. "The council seat is what matters. The family legacy." But the mirror wasn't listening to his rationalizations. Instead, it showed him losing the council election, his father's disappointed frown, and worst of all, Juliet's tear-streaked face as she turned away from him. The last image made his chest tighten unexpectedly. A soft thud at the window interrupted his brooding. A small bat hovered outside, clutching a note in its tiny claws. Sebastian opened the window, and the creature dropped the letter onto his desk before disappearing into the night. The paper sparkled faintly, carrying the distinctive scent of lavender and cinnamon from the Moonbeam Apothecary. Sebastian recognized Juliet's looping handwriting. "Dear Mr. Broody Pants, because you refuse to let me call you Seb. Don't forget, we're expected at tomorrow's Supernatural Small Business Association meeting. I promise not to set anything on fire this time. P.S. Zara says your hair looked especially poofy at the nightclub. She wanted me to tell you that." The shadow mirror pulsed with knowing energy as Sebastian read the note, its surface rippling like barely contained laughter. Moving quickly, Sebastian gathered the books, painting, and his notes. He pressed a hidden panel behind his desk, revealing a small compartment. As he carefully stored the evidence, the mirror flared one final time. In its depths, he caught a glimpse of himself and Juliet, hands clasped as they wove a spell of incredible power, their combined magic illuminating their joined figures. Sebastian pointedly turned his back on the mirror, though he couldn't quite ignore the way his signet ring seemed to warm against his chest where it hung on a chain beneath his shirt. Zara phased through the brick wall of Donovan Lupeshu's office, her ghostly form tingling at the barrier's resistance. The sight that greeted her made her wish she could still take photos. This was blackmail gold. Red string crisscrossed a massive corkboard, connecting grainy surveillance photos of Sebastian and Juliet like something out of a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Little evidence bags labeled suspicious glitter and dance floor residue dangled from thumbtacks, along with what appeared to be a half-eaten bacon sandwich wrapped in plastic with Exhibit C scrawled across it. "Oh honey, you need a hobby," she muttered, drifting closer to inspect his handiwork. "Or a date. Probably both. Maybe a therapist while we're at it." She rolled her ethereal eyes at a photo labeled, "Suspicious Hand-Holding Incident Number 7. The ancient typewriter on his desk caught her attention, its keys dusty with disuse. Perfect. Zara concentrated, channeling her energy into the machine. The keys began clicking furiously, paper feeding through as she composed her masterpiece. "All work and no bacon makes Donnie a dull boy," over and over, each line more crooked than the last. She added a few doodles of little pigs in the margins for good measure. Heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by irritated muttering that echoed through the hallway. "For the last time, Karen, it's Donovan. Not Donnie. Do I look like a cartoon chipmunk to you? And stop leaving bacon-scented air fresheners in my mailbox." Zara quickly shifted to hover near the ceiling, her vintage polka dot dress rippling in an invisible breeze, as she watched the disheveled werewolf journalist stomp in, clutching a massive coffee and a leather-bound notebook that had definitely seen better days. He dropped into his chair, flipping open the notebook to reveal detailed plans for the upcoming council gala. Words like exposé, fraudulent, and public humiliation jumped out from his messy scrawl, alongside a disturbing number of doodles featuring Sebastian with fangs and devil horns. "Time to cool your jets, Sherlock," Zara whispered, concentrating on lowering the temperature around his evidence pile. The effect was immediate. Donovan's carefully groomed fur bristled, standing on end as he shuffled through suddenly frozen papers. A thin layer of frost began creeping across his precious conspiracy board, making the red strings sag under the weight of tiny icicles. "Blasted building maintenance," he growled, reaching for his phone. It rang before he could dial, and Zara recognized the silvery voice on the other end. "Darling, please tell me you have something concrete," Loose Thornshade purred. "The gala is our perfect opportunity, to..." Whatever scheme she was cooking up got cut short as Donovan's stapler decided to tango across his desk, followed by a conga line of paperclips. "What in the hold on? Something weird is happening in my office." He swatted at the dancing supplies, nearly dropping his phone. Zara spotted his prized stash of bacon-flavored chips and couldn't resist. The bag lifted slowly, hovering just above his reaching hands. "Come on, little wolfie," she taunted as he lunged for it, sending case files scattering. "Jump for it." She twirled the bag in lazy circles, relishing how his yellow eyes tracked every movement like a cat with a laser pointer. In his desperate grab for snacks, Donovan knocked over a stack of papers, nearly face-planting into his desk. One caught Zara's eye: a detailed analysis of supernatural law violations relating to love curses. Her amusement vanished as she skimmed the contents, her ghostly form growing colder with each line. This was bad. Far worse than she'd imagined. "Oops," she announced to the empty air, channeling her spectral energy to tip his massive coffee cup. Dark liquid spread across the damning document, rendering it illegible. She made sure to guide the coffee's flow, ensuring maximum damage to anything mentioning Juliet's name. "No, no, no." Donovan frantically blotted at the mess while Zara examined his latest addition to the wall: a crystal-clear photo of Sebastian dipping Juliet during their dance-off. His notes bordered on obsessive, too coordinated for new couple, synchronized breathing, suspicious glitter residue analysis pending. She floated closer, her ethereal form passing through his corkboard. The sheer volume of surveillance photos made her skin crawl, or it would have if she still had skin. A golden envelope materialized on his desk via magical courier, the council gala invitation. Donovan snatched it up, practicing his speech as he paced, his tail practically wagging with self-importance. "Ladies and gentlemen of the supernatural community, I regret to inform you that we've been deceived by..." Zara reached for the invitation, but her hand bounced off an invisible barrier with an annoying static tingle. Anti-spirit wards. Clever wolf. She'd have to give him credit for learning from their last encounter, when she'd replaced all his incriminating photos with selfies of Sebastian making duck faces. Fine then, plan B it was. She focused her energy on his evidence board, channeling her ghostly powers into the most obnoxiously cheerful transformation possible, turning his careful investigation into a sparkly tribute to Donnie's detective agency, complete with hearts, floating bacon bits, and a particularly unflattering doodle of him howling at the moon in a deerstalker hat. "I've got witnesses lined up," Donovan spoke into his phone, oblivious to the chaos building behind him. His free hand gesticulated wildly as he paced. "Yes, counselor, I understand the severity. What do you mean there's glitter in your ear?" He spun around, yellow eyes widening to saucers at his transformed office, a few sparkles falling from his ruffled hair. "I'll call you back." His expression of horror was almost worth getting zapped by those words. Almost. Zara had seen enough. She shot through the wall, leaving behind one final gift. His precious conspiracy board now played a tinny version of Who Let the Dogs Out on endless loop. "Juliet is not going to like this," she muttered, racing toward Moonbeam Apothecary. Behind her, Donovan's howl of frustration echoed through the building. Who's been touching my bacon snacks? Chapter 8, The Council Gala. The clock tower's grand ballroom took Juliet's breath away as she entered on Sebastian's arm. Massive clockwork gears turned overhead with hypnotic grace, their brass surfaces catching the light of enchanted chandeliers. Her dress, a creation she'd spent hours enchanting, shifted between midnight blue and starlight silver, matching the ethereal atmosphere of the council's most prestigious venue. The fabric rippled like liquid starlight with each step, a feat of magic she was particularly proud of, even if the spell had initially turned her entire workroom into a disco ball. "Remember to breathe," Sebastian murmured, his cool hand steady against her back. "You're doing fine." Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one whose hair kept changing color with every spike of anxiety. Right now, she could feel the purple strands shifting towards a nervous shade of green at the tips. Juliet forced herself to take slow breaths, trying to project the same effortless composure Sebastian wore like a second skin. She wished she could bottle whatever gave him that unwavering confidence. It would make a fortune at her potion shop. Across the room, loose Thornshade's calculating violet eyes tracked their movement. The Phi Counselor candidate's silvery gown seemed to capture and reflect every whisper passed behind jeweled fans and golden masks, like a mirror designed to catch secrets instead of light. Juliet caught fragments of conversation as they passed, each one making her heart flutter faster. Quite the unlikely pair. Lightfeather seems different lately. Never seen him smile so much. The orchestra struck up a traditional vampire waltz, its haunting melody perfectly timed to the clock tower's resonant chimes. The music seemed to seep into her bones, making her feel both lighter than air and impossibly grounded. Sebastian turned to her with a slight bow, the gesture somehow both formal and intimate. "Shall we show them what we practiced?" Juliet placed her hand in his, remembering the countless hours they'd spent preparing for this moment. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Her feet moved through the steps they'd rehearsed in his library, where she'd accidentally singed one of his priceless rugs with her nervous magical discharge. Sebastian's hand trembled slightly against her waist, barely noticeable but there all the same. The tremor sent an unexpected thrill through her chest, making her wonder if perhaps she wasn't the only one affected by their closeness. "Your hand is shaking," she whispered, glancing up at him. "Are you nervous?" "Vampires don't get nervous," he replied automatically, though his fingers tightened on hers. "We simply anticipate intensely." A laugh bubbled up in her throat, but before she could respond, a familiar rumpled figure pushed through the elegant crowd. "Well, well." Donovan Lupeshu's yellow eyes gleamed with triumph as he brandished a folder. "Care to explain these inconsistencies?" The music screeched to a halt. Council members drifted closer, drawn to the promise of scandal like moths to flame. The clockwork gears cast dramatic shadows across the marble floor as Donovan flipped open his folder. Witness accounts placing Mr. Lightfeather at his manor during supposed dates. Magical signatures showing Ms. Moon's presence at locations she claimed to visit with him. And this, he pulled out a photograph. A rather cozy dinner between Ms. Moon and Nash Blackwood just last week. "That was a business meeting," Juliet protested, feeling her hair shift to a defensive shade of deep purple. "We were discussing potion suppliers." "Of course you were." Donovan's smile showed too many teeth. "Just like you and Mr. Lightfeather are genuinely in love. Tell me, what's his favorite book?" Magical energy sparked at Juliet's fingertips as she stepped forward. The ballroom fell silent, every eye fixed on her. In that moment, looking at Sebastian's carefully blank expression, something inside her snapped. "Pride and Prejudice," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, feeling the weight of 100 supernatural gazes upon her. "He keeps a first edition hidden behind his treatises on vampire law. He's read it 17 times, but tells everyone it's purely for historical research. He even has little notes in the margins about proper courtship rituals that he thinks I haven't noticed." Sebastian's perfect composure cracked, just slightly, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his aristocratic features. Encouraged, Juliet continued, her hair shifting to a determined shade of rose gold. He pretends to hate the glitter in my potions, but I found a vial of it in his pocket last week. He said it was evidence of contamination, but I've seen him smile when it catches the light. Sometimes he even tilts the vials just so, thinking no one's watching. The magical chandeliers responded to her rising emotions, creating a shower of starlight that matched the tears pricking at her eyes. The crystals chimed softly, a melody that seemed to echo her heartbeat. He catches me every time I trip, which is a lot. He listens to me ramble about potion theory for hours, even though I know he finds it tedious. And yes, he actually loves his last name, Lightfeather, because his mother chose it to remind him there's beauty in being different. He told me that story one night when we were both too tired to maintain our walls. Clockwork cherubs began materializing in the gear mechanisms, their tiny wings beating in time with Juliet's racing heart. Their brass faces wore knowing smiles as they pirouetted through the air. She couldn't stop now if she tried, the words tumbling out like a waterfall. He wanted to be a painter when he was young. There's a hidden room in his manor filled with canvases no one else has ever seen. He reads romance novels in his study at midnight, and pretends they're historical documents if anyone catches him. He hums when he's reading reports he enjoys, and he named his favorite armchair Ferdinand. He even knitted it a tiny antimacassar, though he'd deny it under oath. With each revelation, the tower's magic seemed to pulse in harmony with her words, sending ripples of warmth through the enchanted marble floors. The cherubs multiplied, trailing ribbons of golden light between the gears, weaving a tapestry of glowing threads above the assembled crowd. Council members exchanged meaningful glances as Sebastian moved to stand beside her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it, tinged with something that looked remarkably like wonder. "So yes, Donovan," Juliet finished, her voice catching. "I know these things because somewhere between all the planned appearances and proper dates, I fell in love with him. The real him. And if that's not enough proof for you..." She stopped, suddenly aware of what she'd just admitted. The truth of it hit her like a wave. She hadn't been pretending at all. Every word she'd spoken was real, every detail precious and true, and now she'd revealed it all in front of the entire supernatural council. The clockwork tower chimed again, its sound perfectly matched to her thundering heartbeat, as she waited for Sebastian's reaction. Sebastian found Juliet on the clock tower's balcony, where dozens of enchanted timepieces ticked in perfect synchronization. Her purple hair caught the moonlight, creating an ethereal glow that made his chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. Her earlier speech defending their relationship played on repeat in his mind, disrupting centuries of carefully maintained control. The memory of her standing before the supernatural council, hands on her hips and chin raised in defiance, had shattered something in his carefully constructed walls. "Your speech was..." He paused, searching for words that wouldn't reveal too much, that wouldn't betray how her passionate defense had awakened something ancient and terrifying within him. Unexpectedly convincing. Juliet turned, her magical charms tinkling softly against the clockwork symphony surrounding them. The sound reminded him of wind chimes in a garden he'd known centuries ago, before he'd learned to guard his heart so fiercely. Unexpectedly? A smile tugged at her lips. "You sound surprised that I can string more than 2 sentences together without causing magical mayhem." "That's not what Sebastian ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, mussing it in a way that would normally drive him mad. The simple fact that he didn't immediately fix it disturbed him more than he cared to admit. "You defended me. Us." With such passion. The word us felt dangerous on his tongue, like a spell he wasn't quite ready to cast. The nearby timepieces seemed to tick louder, matching his growing nervousness. Each rhythmic sound echoed his mounting anxiety, a symphony of his own unraveling control. Juliet's green eyes sparkled with something that made him want to step closer, to finally admit that somewhere between the chaos and the cursed love lives and the ridiculous publicity stunts, A flash of movement caught his eye. The shadow mirror's reflection suddenly appeared in every clock face surrounding them, multiplying dozens of times across the balcony. Each surface rippled like liquid silver, showing fragments of possibilities, Juliet laughing as she dragged him through a rain of magical sparks, the two of them dancing in the velvet vein without caring who watched, quiet moments in his library where she'd fallen asleep surrounded by spell books. The visions taunted him with the happiness he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve, yet desperately wanted to claim. Sebastian? Juliet's voice wavered. What's happening? Before he could respond, the balcony doors burst open with enough force to rattle the enchanted clocks. Donovan Lupescu strutted through, his rumpled suit somehow more disheveled than usual, with ink stains spotting his crooked tie and what appeared to be bacon grease on his sleeve. He clutched a piece of parchment like it was made of gold, and Sebastian's stomach dropped as he recognized the distinctive shimmer of magical binding ink. Ladies, gentlemen, and various supernatural entities. Donovan's yellow eyes gleamed with triumph, a predatory grin splitting his sharp features. I believe you'll all find this quite interesting. He waved the document, which Sebastian recognized with mounting horror as their original contract. The same contract he'd sworn was locked safely in his study's enchanted vault. Council members poured onto the balcony, their formal attire a stark contrast to Donovan's disheveled appearance. Jewel-toned robes and ancient symbols of office caught the moonlight as the crowd pressed closer. Sebastian watched helplessly as Juliet's eyes fixed on the magical contract, understanding dawning across her features. Her vibrant purple hair faded to a dull gray before his eyes, magical sparkles dropping lifelessly around her shoulders like dying fireflies. As you can see, Donovan continued, practically bouncing with glee, his wiry frame vibrating with barely contained excitement. Our esteemed candidate for the council seat orchestrated this entire relationship as a publicity stunt. Quite clever, really, Mr. Lightfeather. He emphasized Sebastian's surname with obvious relish, drawing out each syllable like a weapon. Is this true? Juliet's voice was barely a whisper, and Sebastian had never hated himself more than in that moment. A familiar silvery laugh cut through the tension like a blade of ice. Luce Thornshade emerged from the crowd with calculated grace, her violet eyes dancing with malicious delight as she glided forward. Oh, allow me to add some context. She raised her hands, phi magic shimmering in the air like poisoned starlight as she projected images from the velvet vein. Sebastian calculating how to approach Juliet, discussing how her situation could benefit his campaign. Each memory felt like another nail in his coffin. Juliet! Sebastian stepped forward, the surrounding clocks growing louder with each movement. Yes, it started that way, but what? Her voice cracked. It was all just strategy? A way to secure your precious council seat? The clockwork mechanisms above them groaned, gears grinding against each other in a cacophony of metal and magic. Magical tears formed in Juliet's eyes, defying gravity as they hung in the air between them like suspended crystals. I should have known, she continued, backing away. Someone like you would never actually. More tears joined the first, creating a constellation of hurt between them. I'm just the witch who can't even cast a proper love spell without cursing her entire coven. That's not. Sebastian reached for her, but she was already turning away. For the first time in centuries, his vampire reflexes failed him. His fingers grasped only empty air and falling glitter as Juliet fled the balcony. The shadow mirror's reflection appeared one final time in the nearest clock face, taunting him with impossible possibilities. It showed him dancing with Juliet at their wedding, her purple hair restored and dotted with magical flowers that sparkled like captured starlight. She looked at him with such love, such trust, everything he'd just destroyed with his centuries of calculated deception. The vision twisted like a knife in his immortal heart, made worse by knowing he'd earned this pain. Sebastian stood alone on the balcony, his perfect posture finally crumbling as the clock tower began to chime midnight. Each resonant toll hammered home Juliet's absence, while Donovan's satisfied smirk reflected in every surrounding timepiece, a reminder of the werewolf's victory in exposing their charade. The magical tears she'd left behind finally fell, shattering like tiny crystals against the marble floor. Their fragments caught the moonlight, scattering rainbow prisms that seemed to mock the pieces of his carefully constructed world now lying in ruins around him. The last bell toll faded into silence, leaving Sebastian surrounded by ticking clocks and whispering council members. He stared at the space where Juliet had stood, realizing too late that in his careful planning to secure his future, he'd just lost the only thing that truly mattered. The sudden surge of phi magic caught him off guard. Such a shame, Luce's silky voice carried across the balcony as violet energy crackled between her fingers. All that careful planning wasted. But don't worry, Sebastian dear. I'll make sure the council remembers exactly who you really are. The last thing Sebastian saw before Luce's spell struck was Juliet's tear-stained face in every surrounding clock, a haunting reminder of what his centuries of calculation had cost him. Chapter 9: Love and Sacrifice. The crystalline tears hung suspended in the air behind Juliet as she raced through the clock tower's winding corridors, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped hummingbird. She'd barely made it halfway to the exit when the building's ancient mechanisms groaned overhead, their usual steady rhythm disrupted by pulses of deadly phi magic that made her witch's instincts scream in warning. Something was wrong. The magic felt dark, twisted, nothing like the playful energy that usually filled the clock tower. And it was coming from the ballroom, where she'd left Sebastian alone with. Juliet's feet were moving before her mind finished the thought, her body turning back toward the danger even as her head told her to run. The curse-breaking potion bounced against her hip with each step, a reminder of everything she'd worked for, everything she stood to lose. But the thought of Sebastian in danger. She burst through the ballroom's ornate doors, just as a flash of violet light illuminated the horrified faces of the council members. There, in the center of the room, loose Thornshade's magic writhed like thorny vines around Sebastian, constricting with lethal grace. His normally perfect posture was rigid with pain, those piercing blue eyes meeting Juliet's with an emotion she'd never seen there before, fear. "Get back, little witch," Luce sneered, her silver hair floating in an otherworldly breeze. "This is council business now." The massive clockwork gears above them screeched to a grinding halt, their shadows casting strange patterns across the marble floor. Without thinking, Juliet stepped between Sebastian and Luce's spell, her hands raised. The magic that surged through her wasn't her usual chaos of sparkles and unexpected side effects. This was pure, focused power that made her blood sing with certainty. Time seemed to slow as she felt the weight of her curse-breaking potion in her pocket, its carefully crafted magic humming against her hip. The realization hit her like a splash of cold water. She could save her magic or save Sebastian, but not both. The choice was instant. "Juliet, don't!" Sebastian's voice cracked behind her, but she was already moving. She pulled the potion free, its contents glowing like captured moonlight. Months of work, her one chance to break the love curse properly, and she didn't hesitate to channel its power into a shield around Sebastian. The vial shattered in her grip, and she felt the curse splinter with it. Purple and silver light exploded outward, in a cascade that raced through the clock tower's mechanisms like lightning through metal veins. Every timepiece in the building, from the towering central clock face to the tiniest pocket watch, began to chime in perfect harmony, the sound reverberating through her bones. Luce's spell slammed into Juliet's protection and rebounded, transforming into a shower of iridescent butterflies that scattered through the air. The Phi woman's perfect features twisted in shock, as her magic dissolved against the pure, unselfish love Juliet had finally allowed herself to acknowledge. Her knees buckled as the magical backlash hit, but Sebastian's cold hands caught her before she could fall. He pulled her against his chest, and she felt his unnecessary breath catch, as the shadow mirror's reflection appeared in every clock face around them, countless images showing their separate paths merging into one brilliant future. "Impossible," someone whispered, and Juliet realized the council members were pressing forward now instead of away, their expressions transformed from scandal to wonder. The clock tower's ancient enchantments thrummed with approval, responding to the purity of her sacrifice in a way that made the very air sparkle. The curse's power drained from her completely, but the emptiness lasted only a moment before something stronger rushed in to fill it. Her connection to Sebastian blazed like a supernova, making her restored magic dance through her veins like liquid starlight. She turned in his arms to face him, drinking in the way his carefully maintained composure had cracked to reveal raw emotion beneath. "This is preposterous. Luce's voice shook as she backed away, her perfect poise shattering like fine china. Around them, council members who had moments ago been prepared to believe the worst were now closing ranks against the Phi woman instead. "My evidence?" Donovan started, fumbling with his papers only to stop short as they transformed in his hands. Instead of damning proof, elaborate love poetry now covered each page in shimmering ink. His yellow eyes widened comically as he read the first line, "Roses are red, vampires are pale." Sebastian's arms tightened around Juliet as her magic stabilized, neither of them paying attention to the growing crowd of onlookers. Above them, the clock tower's mechanisms slowly resumed their eternal dance, but now they chimed a melody that sounded suspiciously like an old love song Juliet's grandmother used to hum. "I think," Sebastian murmured against her hair, his voice rough with emotion, "we need to revisit our contract terms." Juliet laughed, the sound pure joy as her hair shimmered its brightest purple yet. Her magic, now permanently, wonderfully her own, wove around them both in spirals of light that made the butterflies from Luce's failed spell dance and swirl. "I suppose we do," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "Though I think we've moved well past the fake part of fake dating." The clock tower chimed again, as if in agreement, and Juliet felt Sebastian smile against her palm, real, unguarded, and absolutely perfect. Sebastian ducked through the entrance of Moonbeam Apothecary, narrowly avoiding a particularly determined floating teapot that seemed hell-bent on serving him what it deemed victory tea. The familiar scent of lavender and cinnamon wrapped around him, and he found himself relaxing despite the shop's characteristic chaos. When had this madhouse started feeling like home? A second teapot, this one sporting a chipped spout and what appeared to be a tiny top hat, whistled the first few notes of a congratulatory tune before Sebastian silenced it with a stern look. "I see Juliet's been telling you all about the council meeting," he muttered, watching the teapot droop dramatically. He found Juliet in the center of her usual whirlwind, though something was distinctly different. Her magic, typically as unpredictable as a caffeinated pixie, flowed around her with newfound grace. Heart-shaped smoke rings puffed effortlessly from her wand as she reorganized her potion shelves, each bottle settling perfectly into place. "Your timing's impeccable," she called out without turning around. "I was just about to test if stable magic means I can finally brew a decent cup of coffee." "Perish the thought," Sebastian replied, carefully setting down the shadow mirror he'd brought. "I've grown oddly fond of your explosive espresso attempts." The mirror hummed contentedly as he hung it above the counter, its surface rippling like liquid starlight. Instead of the usual shadowy reflections of their fears and regrets, it showed fragments of possibilities, glimpses of shared laughter, quiet moments, and adventures yet to come. Juliet's enchanted broom swished past, trailing sparkles as it swept imaginary dust from around their feet. Sebastian found himself falling into an easy rhythm with her as they sorted through ingredients. His methodical approach complemented her creative chaos, and they worked in comfortable silence punctuated only by the occasional snicker when their hands brushed, reaching for the same jar. "I suppose now's as good a time as any to mention the Lightfeather connection," Sebastian said finally, carefully alphabetizing a row of crystallized dragon tears. Juliet paused, a bottle of pixie dust balanced precariously in her hand. "The what now?" "It seems our ancestors were acquainted." He cleared his throat. "According to the family grimoires, a moon witch and a Lightfeather vampire once attempted to unite the magical communities through marriage. It didn't exactly go as planned." Juliet's laughter bubbled up, bright and infectious. "Let me guess, they had the same impeccable timing we do." "Worse, actually. They managed to turn an entire wedding party into singing toadstools. Took weeks to sort out." The shop's crystals began chiming in harmony, a sound like tiny bells catching starlight. Sebastian was about to comment when a formal envelope materialized in front of him, bearing the SCREAM seal. His hands only slightly trembled as he opened it, reading aloud, "We are pleased to officially confirm your appointment to the council seat, effective immediately. P.S. Your innovative addition of glitter to formal proceedings has been noted with great interest." Sebastian sighed dramatically, though he couldn't quite hide his smile. "I'll never live down the glitter incident, will I?" "Not if I have anything to say about it," Juliet grinned, then gestured toward the window. "Oh look, someone else is having a sparkly day." Outside, Donovan Lupescu trudged past, clutching a box of what had once been damning evidence. Now pink glitter trailed in his wake, and what appeared to be dozens of poorly written love poems kept attempting to escape the box. Above him, Zara's transparent form twirled gleefully, conducting the aerial dance of the wayward papers. Sebastian reached up to grab a tome on advanced potion theory, simultaneously catching a wobbling bottle by Juliet's elbow without even looking. The movement felt as natural as breathing, or would have if he still needed to breathe. When had they become so in sync? The clock tower's deep toll suddenly reverberated through Evergloam, each strike sending ripples of magic through the air. Every timepiece in the apothecary began to spin, their hands whirling as if making up for years of stuck time. The pocket watch in Sebastian's vest actually hiccuped, spouting tiny gears that transformed into butterflies. Juliet's collection of magical charms started their tinkling melody again, the same love song that had once sent him backing away in panic. This time, Sebastian pulled her closer, watching their reflection in the shadow mirror. Where there had once been two separate paths, now there was only one, winding forward into a shared future. The temperamental cauldron in the corner chose that moment to let out a satisfied burp, producing a perfect heart-shaped cloud that drifted lazily overhead. Sebastian leaned down, finally closing the distance between them. As their lips met, every potion bottle in the shop simultaneously blushed rose gold, casting the room in warm, shimmering light. "So," Juliet murmured between kisses, "about that coffee." "Don't you dare," Sebastian warned, but he was smiling. "I have plans for this afternoon that don't involve putting out magical fires." Around them, Evergloam's perpetual autumn briefly surrendered to spring, cherry blossoms drifting past the window. Neither of them noticed, too caught up in their own perfectly imperfect moment, while the teapots above staged what appeared to be a celebratory synchronized floating routine. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, and comment. I love hearing from you. You can also visit me at winvalentine.com to stay up to date.